I arrived at my daughter's house for Thanksgiving, but her husband slammed the door in my face. "We have nothing to thank you for. Old man, get lost," he spat. My daughter added, "Dad, the CEO is coming. You do not belong here." I turned to leave, but suddenly a limousine pulled up. The CEO stepped out, saw me, and dropped to his knees. "Chairman Freeman," he gasped. "I did not know you were coming." The silence that followed was louder than a scream. But before I tell you how I fired my own son-in-law on his front porch, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people you sacrificed everything for. The snow was falling in Connecticut. It was that soft, powdery kind that looks beautiful on a postcard but feels like needles against your skin when you are 75 years old and standing on a porch where you are not wanted. I adjusted my grip on the Tupperware container. It was still warm. Inside was a sweet potato pie. It was not just any pie. It was my late wife Lucille's recipe, the one with the extra nutmeg and the brown sugar crumble on top. The one she used to make every Thanksgiving before the cancer took her. I had spent 6 hours in my small kitchen peeling potatoes and rolling dough, just hoping that the smell would bring a little bit of her back to our daughter Chloe. I looked at the house. It was a sprawling colonial mansion with white pillars and manicured hedges that were currently frosted with ice. It was a beautiful house, a house that screamed success, a house that shouted to the world that the people living inside had made it. I knew exactly how much it cost because my private equity firm, Freeman Capital, held the mortgage. I knew exactly how much the renovations cost because the salary I approved for my son-in-law paid for them, but they did not know that. To them, I was just Gus, the retired bus driver, the man who lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the city and took the Greyhound bus to visit. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The chime was deep and resonant, echoing through the large foyer inside. I could hear laughter. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I could smell the roasting turkey and the sage stuffing. It smelled like family. It smelled like a home I was paying for but was not allowed to enter. I waited. The cold was seeping through the thin soles of my shoes. I stamped my feet, trying to keep the circulation going. I wasn't wearing my expensive coat today. I wore my old wool jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs. I wore it because it was warm, but also because it was a test. I always tested them. I wanted to see if they loved the father or the wallet. For 5 years, the answer had been disappointing. Today, it would be devastating. The door swung open. It wasn't Chloe. It was Derek, my son-in-law. He was a tall man with slicked back hair and a jawline that he thought made him look powerful but only made him look petulant. He was wearing a novelty apron over his designer shirt. It said, "Kiss the Cook," in bright red letters. He held a glass of expensive scotch in one hand. When he saw me, his smile vanished, instantly replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was the look you give a solicitor or a stray dog that has wandered onto your lawn. "What are you doing here?" Derek asked. He didn't say hello. He didn't say Happy Thanksgiving. He blocked the doorway with his body, his elbow resting on the frame, effectively barring me from stepping inside. "I came for dinner, Derek," I said, my voice raspy from the cold air. "I brought the pie. Chloe loves the pie." Derek looked at the Tupperware container in my hands with disdain. He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing. "We didn't invite you, Gus," he said, his voice flat and cold. "I thought Chloe made that clear when she called you last week." "She called and said you were busy," I said. "She didn't say I wasn't welcome." "It is Thanksgiving, Derek. Families are supposed to be together." Derek laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of any humor. "Family," he repeated. "Look at you, Gus. Just look at you." He gestured at my coat, at my worn shoes, at the snow collecting on my hat. "You look like a vagrant," he said. "You look like someone who sleeps on a park bench. Do you have any idea who is coming to dinner tonight?" I shook my head slowly. I assumed it was just family. Derek leaned forward, the smell of expensive alcohol on his breath. "Mr. Harrington is coming," he whispered, as if speaking the name of a deity. "The CEO of the company, my boss. The man who decides if I get the vice president promotion next month. He is bringing his wife. They are billionaires, Gus, real billionaires, not people who scrape by on a pension. I knew Harrington. I had hired him 10 years ago. I had taught him how to read a balance sheet. I was the one who suggested he take over the day-to-day operations so I could retire to the shadows. But I didn't say that. I just stood there holding my warm pie. "So you are ashamed of me?" I asked quietly. It is not about shame, Derek snapped, losing his patience. It is about optics. It is about fitting in. You don't fit in, Gus. You never have. You sit there and tell your boring stories about the old days, and you chew with your mouth open, and you wear clothes from Goodwill. I can't have you ruining the vibe. I can't have Harrington thinking I come from this. He waved his hand at me, encompassing my entire existence in a gesture of dismissal. This is a high-stakes dinner, old man. I have spent 6 months courting Harrington. I have spent $10,000 on wine alone. I am not going to let you wreck it with your sweet potato pie and your poverty. I felt a tightening in my chest. It wasn't the cold, it was the heartbreak. I had approved Derek's bonus last year so he could buy this house. I had approved his raise so he could buy that car in the driveway. I had given him everything he had, and he was using it to build a wall to keep me out. I just want to see my daughter, I said, trying to keep my dignity. I will stay in the kitchen. I won't talk to your boss. I just want to give her the pie and wish her a happy Thanksgiving. No, Derek said loud enough to be heard inside. Who is it, honey? A voice called out. It was Chloe. She appeared behind Derek, peering over his shoulder. She looked stunning. She was wearing a red velvet dress and diamond earrings. Earrings I knew Derek couldn't afford on his salary alone. When she saw me, her face fell. She didn't look happy. She looked panicked. Dad, she said. Oh, God. Dad, what are you doing here? I came to bring you this, I said, lifting the pie slightly. It is Mom's recipe. I made it this morning. Chloe looked at the pie, then she looked at Derek. She saw the anger in her husband's eyes. She saw the ultimatum written on his face. She had to choose, the father who raised her or the husband who controlled her social status. She chose. Dad, you have to go, she said, her voice high and tight. You can't be here. Not tonight. But it is Thanksgiving, Chloe, I said. I am all alone. I know, she said, and for a second I saw a flicker of guilt, but she crushed it instantly. I know, but... Look at you, Dad. You are dripping on the porch. You are making a mess. Mr. Harrington will be here any minute. His limo is literally 5 minutes away. So I am a dirty secret, I asked. Don't be dramatic, Derek interrupted, stepping forward aggressively. You are not a secret. You are a nuisance. Now get off my property before the guests arrive. I don't want Harrington seeing a beggar on my doorstep. He reached out and shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. I was 75 years old. The porch was icy. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the welcome mat. I tried to regain my balance, but my hands were full. I fell. I hit the cold concrete hard. My hips slammed against the stone. But the worst sound wasn't my bones hitting the ground. It was the sound of the Tupperware cracking. The lid popped off. The pie, my Lucille's pie, flew out. It landed face down on the dirty, wet doormat. The golden crust shattered. The sweet orange filling splattered across Derek's polished leather shoes. Derek looked down at his shoes. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. You clumsy old fool, he roared. Look what you did. These are Italian leather. These cost more than your life. He kicked the remains of the pie. He kicked the food I had made with love. He kicked it off the porch into the snow. Dad, are you okay? Chloe asked, taking a half step forward. Don't touch him. Derek snapped at her, grabbing her arm. He is fine. He is just looking for pity. Look at him. He is pathetic. I lay there on the cold porch, my hip throbbing, looking at the ruined pie in the snow. It looked like a wound. It looked like my heart. I slowly pushed myself up. My joints ached. I brushed the snow off my wool jacket. I didn't look at Chloe. I couldn't bear to see the shame in her eyes, not for me, but of me. I looked at Derek. I looked him dead in the eye. You destroyed the pie, I said, my voice low and steady. I should destroy you, Derek spat. Get lost. Get out of here. If I see you when Harrington arrives, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I mean it, Gus. You are dead to us. He grabbed the door handle. Chloe, I said, looking at my daughter one last time. Is this what you want? Chloe looked at the pie in the snow. She looked at her husband. She looked at the warm house behind her. Just go, Dad, she whispered. Please, just go. Derek slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet suburban street. I stood there staring at the heavy wooden door. I stood there shivering. I walked down the steps. I walked past the pie that was already freezing in the snow. I walked down the long driveway. I reached the sidewalk just as a long black limousine turned the corner. It moved slowly, gracefully like a shark in dark water. It pulled up to the curb right in front of me. The driver got out and opened the rear door. A man stepped out. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and a coat that cost as much as a small house. It was Harrington. He adjusted his scarf, looking toward the house, expecting a warm welcome. Then he turned and saw me standing there in the snow, brushing dirt off my knees. He froze. His eyes went wide. He looked at my face, then at the house, then back to me. He ignored the snow. He ignored the cold. He dropped his cane and fell to his knees right there on the sidewalk. "Chairman Freeman," he gasped, his voice trembling with shock. "Chairman, what are you doing out here?" I looked at Harrington. I looked at the house where my daughter and her husband were frantically cleaning pie off a shoe. I smiled. It was a cold smile. "Get up, Harrington," I said. "We have work to do." "Work, sir? On Thanksgiving?" "Yes," I said, brushing the last of the snow from my shoulder. "I am firing someone, and I need a witness." The sound of the plastic container cracking against the frozen stone of the porch was a noise that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a sharp snap followed by the wet slosh of sweet potato filling hitting the welcome mat. That mat had the word "Welcome" written in elegant cursive script. But as the steam rose from the ruined pie into the biting winter air, I knew that word was a lie. I stood there shivering, not just from the wind that whipped around the columns of the mansion, but from the shock of Derek's violence. I looked down at the mess. That was Lucille's recipe. It was the last connection I had to the woman who had built this family with me, and now it was just orange slush, freezing on the doorstep of ungratefulness. Then I heard the rapid click of heels on the hardwood floor inside. The sound was frantic. A moment later, Chloe appeared in the doorway. She pushed past Derek, not to help me, but to inspect the damage to her property. My breath caught in my throat. My daughter looked like a queen. She was wearing a floor-length emerald green evening gown that hugged her figure, a dress I knew cost $4,000 because I had seen the charge on the supplementary credit card I allowed her to keep. Her hair was swept up in an intricate bun secured with diamond pins, and her neck was adorned with a necklace that sparkled under the porch lights. She was breathtaking. She was everything I had worked 40 years to make her. For a split second, just a heartbeat, I let myself hope. I let myself believe that the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders would see her father standing in the snow, pushed down by her husband, and she would be outraged. I waited for her to scream at Derek. I waited for her to rush to me to take my cold hands in hers and apologize. I waited for the daughter who used to cry when she scraped her knee to show me the mercy I had always shown her. But Chloe did not look at me. She looked at the pie. Her eyes went wide with horror. Not horror at the violence, but horror at the aesthetic violation of her entryway. "Oh my God," she gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "The mat. The custom mat. It is ruined." She finally looked up at me, but there was no love in her eyes. There was only irritation, the kind of irritation you feel when a waiter spills water on your table or when a pigeon lands too close to you in the park. She looked at my old wool coat with the fraying cuffs. She looked at my worn-out boots that were wet with slush. She looked at my face, which was red from the wind and lined with age. "Dad!" She hissed, her voice a whisper of venom. "Look what you did. You made a mess." "I did not do this, Chloe," I said, my voice trembling. Derek pushed me. He threw the pie. Chloe didn't even glance at her husband. She didn't care about the cause, she only cared about the effect. "It does not matter how it happened," she snapped. "It is there. It is orange, and it is ugly, and it is right where my guests are going to walk in 20 minutes. Why do you always have to be so clumsy? Why do you always have to ruin things?" Ruin things. I had built the scholarship fund that sent her to Yale. I had bought the car she learned to drive in. I had paid for the wedding where she danced with me for 3 minutes before ignoring me for the rest of the night. "I just wanted to bring you something," I said. "It is Thanksgiving. It is your mother's recipe." "We have a caterer, Dad," she said, rolling her eyes. "We have a 5-star chef in the kitchen right now preparing a heritage turkey and truffle mashed potatoes. We do not need a soggy pie in a plastic tub. We are not living in the projects anymore." The words cut deeper than the cold. She was ashamed of where she came from. She was ashamed of the sweet potatoes that had fed us when we had nothing. She took a step closer, but she didn't cross the threshold. She stayed in the warmth of the foyer, framing herself against the golden light like a portrait I wasn't allowed to touch. "Dad, listen to me. she said, her tone shifting from anger to a frantic pleading that was somehow worse. You have to understand, tonight is not just a dinner, it is a career-defining moment. Derek's boss is coming. Mr. Harrington. He is the CEO of the entire conglomerate. He is a billionaire dad, a real billionaire, not like the people in your neighborhood. I knew Harrington. I had known him since he was a junior analyst. I was the one who promoted him. I was the one who signed his bonus checks. But Chloe didn't know that. She only saw the suit. She only saw the title. He expects a certain level of class, she continued, gesturing vaguely at my appearance. He expects sophistication. And frankly, Dad, look at you. She looked me up and down, her gaze traveling over my clothes like a scanner detecting defects. You look like you just walked off a construction site, she said. That coat is 20 years old. Your pants are baggy. You haven't shaved. If Mr. Harrington sees you, he is going to think we are low class. He is going to think Derek comes from trash. We cannot afford that perception, Dad. Derek is up for a promotion that could change our lives. Change your lives. I had already changed their lives. I had given them a life most people only dream of. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. So I am trash, I asked quietly. I didn't say that, she sighed, exasperated. I am just saying you don't fit. Not tonight. Not with these people. You are too much reality for this fantasy we are selling. Can't you understand that? Can't you just be happy for us and stay away? She looked over my shoulder at the dark street. Did you take the bus? She asked. Yes, I said. Of course you did, she muttered. So, you are stuck here. We can't have you standing on the porch when the limo pulls up. It would look like we are turning away a beggar. She bit her lip, thinking. She was managing the problem. I wasn't a father to be loved, I was a logistical issue to be solved. Okay, here is what we are going to do, she said. You can't come inside. The foyer is the staging area for the cocktail hour. The living room is full of guests. The kitchen is full of staff. There is nowhere to hide you. Hide me? So you are going to go to the garage, she said, pointing toward the side of the huge house. The side door is unlocked. Go in there. It is out of the wind. There is a chair or something you can sit on. The garage, I repeated. You want me to eat Thanksgiving dinner in the garage? It is heated, she said defensively. Mostly. And it is clean. Just go in there and stay quiet. Don't turn on the lights. Don't open the big door. Just sit tight. When the dinner is over and the guests leave, I will pack up some of the leftovers. The turkey is really good, Dad. You will like it. I will bring you a plate and then call you an Uber to the bus station. She smiled, a tight, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. It is a good plan, she said, convincing herself. It works for everyone. You get to be close to us, but you don't ruin the night. Okay. She didn't wait for an answer. She assumed I would obey. I had always obeyed. I had always been the silent wallet in the background, the supportive shadow. She thought I was weak. She thought I was desperate for any scrap of affection she would throw my way. Go now, she urged, making a shooing motion with her hands, before the headlights appear. Go, Dad, hurry. She stepped back and grabbed the heavy door. She looked at me one last time, not with love, but with a critical assessment to make sure I was moving. And Dad, she added, try not to touch anything in the garage. Derek just had the Porsche detailed. She slammed the door. The lock clicked. I was alone again in the snow. The pie was still on the mat, a ruined monument to my love. I looked at the closed door. I looked at the warm light spilling from the windows. I could see shadows moving inside. I could see them laughing. I stood there for a long minute. The wind bit through my coat, but I didn't feel it anymore. The cold inside me was colder than the winter. I looked toward the garage. It was a separate structure attached by a breezeway, a place for cars and tools, a place for things that served a purpose but weren't fit for the house. They wanted me to go to the garage. They wanted me to hide. They wanted me to wait for scraps like a dog. I gripped my cane tighter. My knuckles turned white. I could leave. I could walk away right now. I could go back to the bus stop, go back to my quiet apartment, and never speak to them again. I could cut them out of the will, disappear, and let them drown in the debt I knew they were accumulating. But that was too easy. That was just fading away. And Augustus Freeman did not fade away. I was a businessman. And when a deal goes bad, you don't just walk out of the room. You audit the books. You inspect the damage. And then you liquidate the assets. They wanted me in the garage. Fine. I would go to the garage. I would sit in the dark. I would wait. But I wasn't waiting for leftovers. I was waiting for the moment to strike. I turned and walked slowly toward the side of the house. My boots crunched in the snow. I passed the dining room window. I could see the table set with crystal and china. I saw the empty chair at the head of the table where Derek would sit. I walked to the side door of the garage. I turned the handle. It opened. I stepped inside. It smelled of gasoline and rubber and cold concrete. It was dark. I found a switch, but I didn't turn it on. I remembered Chloe's order. Don't turn on the lights. I closed the door behind me. I stood in the darkness listening to the hum of the freezer chest in the corner. I found a stool near the workbench. I sat down. I was 75 years old. I was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I was sitting in a garage on Thanksgiving while my daughter entertained the man who worked for me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I checked the time. The CEO would be arriving in 10 minutes. I sat back against the cold wall. I let the darkness wrap around me. Let them have their appetizers, let them have their wine, let them laugh and toast to their success. I was the ghost in the machine, and the machine was about to break. The garage was a tomb of concrete and cold air. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, severing the connection to the warmth and the light of the house. The smell of roasting turkey and sage stuffing, which had been so inviting just moments ago, was instantly replaced by the sharp chemical sting of gasoline motor oil and the rotting sweetness of garbage. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The only light came from the small window in the side door, a pale gray rectangle of winter sky that offered no heat. I pulled my old wool coat tighter around my body, but the damp chill of the garage seemed to bypass the fabric and settle directly into my bones. I looked around for a place to sit. There were no chairs, no benches, just shelves lined with expensive tools that looked like they had never been used, and a shiny red Porsche 911 parked in the center of the bay like a shrine to vanity. I knew exactly how much that car cost. I knew because I had approved the quarterly bonus structure at Freeman Capital that allowed Derek to lease it. It was a beautiful machine wasted on a man who didn't know how to drive it properly. I walked past the car, my hand brushing the cold metal of the hood. In the corner near the recycling bins, I found a wobbly wooden stool. It was covered in dust and splinters. I dragged it away from the trash cans, trying to find a spot that wasn't drafty, but the cold was everywhere. I sat down. My knees popped a sound that seemed too loud in the silence. I rested my hands on my lap and looked at the wall. This was my Thanksgiving. Sitting on a broken stool in a garage next to a bag of recycling while my daughter and her husband entertained a man who worked for me. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. But the pain wasn't just about the cold or the hunger. It was about the memory that was clawing its way up from the back of my mind. I closed my eyes and I was back in my small apartment 2 years ago. It was a rainy Tuesday night. My phone had rung at 2 a.m. It was Derek. He was crying. Not just crying, he was sobbing, heaving breaths that sounded like a dying animal. He came over to my place, rain soaking his expensive suit, his eyes wild with terror. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I ate my breakfast every morning, and he told me everything. He had a gambling problem. It wasn't just a few bad hands of poker. It was sports betting online, casinos, high-stakes leverage. He was in the hole, deep, $85,000 deep. And the people he owed weren't banks. They were people who broke legs for a living. He told me they were going to hurt him. He told me they were going to come to the house. He told me Chloe was going to leave him if she found out. He grabbed my hand that night, his palms sweaty and cold. Please, Gus, he had begged. Please don't let Chloe know. She will divorce me. She will take everything. I love her, Gus. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I just need a lifeline. I looked at him then. I didn't see a son-in-law I liked. I saw a weak man, a man who chased shortcuts. But I also saw my daughter's husband. I saw the man she loved. If I let him fall, it would break her heart. It would destroy the life she thought she was building. I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't let her world collapse because he was a fool. So I stood up. I went to my bedroom. I pulled a checkbook from my safe. Not the one I used for groceries, the one from my private trust. I wrote a check for $85,000. I handed it to him. I didn't ask for a repayment plan. I didn't ask for interest. I just asked for his word. Fix this, I had told him, and never do it again. Make my daughter happy. That is your repayment. He had fallen to his knees that night. He had kissed my hand. He had sworn on his mother's grave that I was his savior, that he would never forget what I did. He told me I was the greatest man he had ever known. I opened my eyes and looked around the garage. 2 years later, the Savior was sitting next to the garbage. The greatest man he had ever known was being hidden away like a dirty secret because he didn't match the decor. He had taken my money, he had saved his legs and his marriage, and then he had rewritten history in his head. He had convinced himself that he was a self-made man, and that I was just an old relic to be discarded. He never told Chloe. He let her believe he was perfect. He let her believe I was just a retired bus driver with a small pension. The sound of the door opening snapped me out of my memories. A wedge of golden light sliced across the concrete floor, blinding me for a second. Derek stepped into the garage. He wasn't wearing his Kiss the Cook apron anymore. He had taken it off to reveal his crisp white shirt and silk tie. He looked polished. He looked successful. He looked like a lie. He was moving fast, frantic, his eyes darting around the shelves. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking for wine. "Where is the vintage reserve?" he muttered to himself, shoving boxes aside. "I know I put it here." He spotted a crate near the workbench. He rushed over and grabbed a bottle of Chateau Margaux, dusting it off with his sleeve. It was a $2,000 bottle of wine. I knew because I had given it to them as a housewarming gift 5 years ago. They had probably forgotten that too. He turned to leave, hugging the bottle to his chest, and that was when he saw me sitting on the stool in the shadows. He jumped, his eyes widening. For a second, I saw the fear I had seen 2 years ago, but it vanished, instantly replaced by that sneer of contempt that had become his default expression whenever he looked at me. "Jesus," he hissed. "You scared me." "Why are you sitting in the dark like a gargoyle?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked at the man whose knees I had saved. Derek walked over to me. He didn't come close enough to touch me, but close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. He loomed over me, using his height to try and intimidate me. "Listen to me, old man," he said, his voice a low growl. "We are about to sit down for dinner. Mr. Harrington and his wife are pulling into the driveway any second now. This is the most important night of my career. Do you understand that?" I nodded slowly. "I understand, Derek." "Good," he said. "So here are the rules. You stay in here. You don't open that door. You don't come out to use the bathroom. You don't come out to get water. If you make a sound, if I hear so much as a cough from in here, I will make you regret it." He leaned in closer, his face twisting into something ugly. "Chloe thinks you are harmless," he whispered. "She thinks you are just her sweet old dad. But I know you are a leech. You come around here looking for handouts, looking for scraps. Well, I am done feeding you." I looked at his wrist. He was wearing a Rolex, a watch he bought 3 months after I paid off his debt. "I never asked you for money, Derek," I said softly. He flinched as if I had slapped him. He knew what I meant. The memory of that rainy Tuesday night flickered in his eyes, but he shoved it down deep. He couldn't acknowledge it. To acknowledge it would be to admit that he was a fraud. "Shut up," he snapped. "Just shut up. I am warning you, Gus. If you ruin this for me, if you wander out there and let Harrington see you, I will end this little arrangement." "What arrangement?" I asked. "The charity arrangement," he said. "We let you come over. We let you see Chloe. But I can stop that. I have power of attorney over the house if Chloe agrees, and I can convince her. She listens to me." He paused, letting the threat hang in the freezing air. "I have brochures, Gus. Brochures for a facility upstate. Green Meadows. It sounds nice, but it is a warehouse for people nobody wants. It is state-funded. It smells like urine and boiled cabbage. If you embarrass me tonight, I will have you committed. I will tell the courts you are senile. I will tell them you are a danger to yourself. I will put you in a room with 4 other old men, and I will throw away the key." I stared at him. He was threatening to lock me away. He was threatening to strip me of my freedom, to bury me alive in a nursing home, all because he was afraid his boss would see me. "You would do that?" I asked. "You would do that to Chloe's father?" "I would do what is necessary to protect my family," he said, straightening his tie. "And my family is Chloe and me. You are just the past, and the past belongs in the dark." He turned on his heel, clutching the wine bottle like a weapon. "Stay quiet," he commanded, "or pack your bags for Green Meadows." He walked back to the door. He opened it, and the warmth and the light and the smell of turkey flooded in for a brief second, tantalizing and cruel. Then he stepped through and slammed the door shut. I heard the lock turn. He had locked me in. I sat there in the returning darkness. The cold settled back around me, heavier than before. My hands were numb, my feet were blocks of ice. But my mind was on fire. He had threatened me. He had threatened the man who owned the building he worked in. He had threatened the man who could fire him with a text message. He had mistaken my silence for weakness and my patience for submission. I looked at the door. I looked at the crack of light underneath it. He thought I was trapped. He thought I was a helpless old man afraid of a nursing home. He didn't know that the lion doesn't roar when it is stalking. It waits. It waits for the prey to expose its neck. And Derek had just exposed everything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The signal was weak in the garage, but it was there. I checked the time. Mr. Harrington would be arriving in minutes. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but they held me. I walked over to the side door, the one leading to the driveway. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Derek had been so focused on keeping me out of the house he had forgotten that I could leave the garage. But I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. I cracked the door open just an inch. I could see the driveway. I could see the snow falling softly, covering the world in white. I could see the headlights of a long black car turning into the cul-de-sac. The limousine. Mr. Harrington was here. I closed the door. I went back to my stool. I sat down and waited. Derek wanted me to be quiet. He wanted me to be invisible. I would give him exactly what he wanted, until the moment I took everything he had. The garage was cold, but I didn't feel it anymore. All I felt was the anticipation, the kind of feeling you get right before the storm breaks. I folded my hands in my lap. I took a deep breath of the gasoline-scented air. "Let the dinner begin," I whispered. I was ready for the main course. I sat in the shadows of the unheated garage, my breath forming small gray clouds in the frigid air. The only light came from the single dusty window that faced the driveway, and through it, I watched the theater of my daughter's life play out. My knees ached from the cold, and my stomach rumbled a reminder of the sweet potato pie that lay ruined in the snow just a few yards away. I was sitting on a plastic bucket surrounded by oil stains and rusted tools while inside my family prepared to feast. It was a stark contrast to the boardrooms I usually commanded, but I stayed quiet. I stayed invisible. I needed to see just how far they would go. Then the headlights swept across the garage door, blinding me for a moment. A long, sleek black limousine turned into the driveway, its tires crunching softly on the fresh snow. It was a Lincoln Continental, stretched and polished until it looked like a black mirror. This was it. The arrival of the Messiah, the man Derek had been sweating over for weeks. I watched as the front door of the house flew open. Derek and Chloe didn't just walk out, they rushed out. Derek wasn't wearing a coat despite the freezing temperature. He wanted to show his eagerness, his subservience. He ran down the steps, his expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the ice, but he recovered quickly, desperate to reach the car door before the driver could. Chloe followed him, smoothing her dress, checking her hair, her face arranged into a mask of perfect welcoming delight. She looked beautiful, and that hurt more than the cold. She looked like the daughter I had raised to be a queen, but she was acting like a court jester. The driver, a stoic man in a black cap, opened the rear door. A leg emerged, first clad in charcoal wool trousers and a shoe that I recognized immediately as a bespoke Oxford, likely hand-stitched in London. Then Mr. Harrington stepped out. He was a man who carried his authority like a second skin. He was in his 60s with silver hair combed back and a face that was lined with the kind of wisdom you only get from navigating high-stakes markets for 40 years. He wore a camel haircoat that probably cost more than Derek's car. In his hand, he held a wooden box. It wasn't just a box. It was mahogany with brass hinges. I leaned closer to the dirty glass of the garage window. I knew what was in that box. Derek practically bowed. "Welcome, sir," he said, his voice pitching higher than usual. "Welcome to our humble home. We are so honored you could make it." Harrington smiled a polite, practiced smile. He shook Derek's hand, but I noticed he didn't take off his leather glove. "Thank you, Derek Harrington," said his voice deep and resonant, carrying through the thin garage door. "It is good of you to host us on such a holiday." Chloe stepped forward, executing a clumsy curtsy that made me wince. "We are the ones who are grateful, Mr. Harrington," she gushed. "Please come inside. It is freezing out here." Harrington nodded, but he didn't move toward the house immediately. He turned and reached back into the car, helping his wife, a petite woman in a fur coat, out onto the driveway. Then he lifted the wooden box slightly. "I brought a little something for the table," Harrington said. "A 1982 Chateau Margaux. I hope it pairs well with turkey." Derek's eyes bulged. I could see the greed flare in them, even from 20 feet away. That was a $5,000 bottle of wine. A legendary vintage. It was the kind of wine you drank when you closed a merger, not when you were trying to impress a boss you secretly despised. "Oh, sir, you shouldn't have," Derek stammered, reaching out to take the box as if it were the Holy Grail. This is too generous." "Nonsense," Harrington said. "Good wine is meant to be shared with good people." Derek clutched the box to his chest. "You are right, sir. And we have only the best people here tonight. I curated the guest list personally. Only the most elite. The movers and shakers. No riffraff, no dead weight. Just the people who matter. No riffraff, no dead weight." I sat on my bucket in the freezing garage and felt the words hit me like physical blows. I was the riffraff. I was the dead weight. The man who had signed the checks that kept his company afloat, the man who owned the controlling interest in his future, was currently being classified as debris to be swept aside. Harrington frowned slightly. It was a micro-expression, a tightening of the corners of his eyes that only someone who knew him well would catch. I knew him well. He didn't like snobbery. He valued character over status. Elite Harrington repeated, testing the word. "That is interesting. I have always found that Thanksgiving is about family, not status." Derek missed the cue completely. He laughed, a nervous braying sound. "Of course family. But you know what I mean, sir. Successful family. People who contribute." Harrington looked at the house, then back at Derek. He seemed to be looking for something or someone. "Speaking of family," Harrington said, his voice casual but probing. "I recall you mentioning your wife's father lives in the area. Mr. Freeman, is it?" My heart hammered against my ribs. He remembered. Years ago at a company gala, I had briefly met Harrington while incognito. I had introduced myself simply as Gus. We had talked about fishing for 20 minutes. He didn't know I was his boss, but he remembered the man. "Is he joining us tonight?" Harrington asked. I have always had a deep admiration for the older generation. They built the foundations we stand on. I would love to shake his hand. The air in the driveway seemed to freeze. Derek went rigid. Chloe stopped smiling. This was the moment. The crossroads. All they had to do was say yes. All they had to do was say, "He is here. He is just freshening up." They could have come to the garage. They could have apologized. They could have brought me in. I would have forgiven them. I would have played the part of the eccentric old father. I would have saved them. But they were too deep in their lie. They were too ashamed of the man in the wool coat. Chloe stepped forward, linking her arm through Harrington's, trying to steer him toward the door and away from the question. "Oh, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper of performative sadness. "It is so kind of you to ask. We wanted him here. We really did." "So where is he?" Harrington asked, stopping his forward motion. Chloe looked down at her shoes, then up at Harrington, her eyes shining with fake tears. She was a better actress than I ever gave her credit for. "My father, he isn't well," she lied. Her voice trembled perfectly. His mind isn't what it used to be. He has advanced dementia, sir." I gripped the edge of the workbench, my fingernails digging into the wood. Dementia. She was declaring me incompetent. She was erasing my mind to cover her tracks. "Oh dear," Harrington said, his tone softening with genuine sympathy. "I am so sorry to hear that." "It has been very hard on us," Derek chimed in, shaking his head solemnly. "He gets violent. He gets confused. He doesn't recognize us anymore. He doesn't know who he is. I know exactly who I am, Derek. I thought my rage burning hot enough to melt the snow on the roof. I am the man who paid for your wedding. I am the man who paid off your gambling debts. And I am the man who is going to fire you." "So where is he now?" Harrington asked. "He is in a facility," Chloe said quickly. "A very nice nursing home. Shady Pines. It is the best place for him. He needs 24-hour care. If we brought him here, with the noise and the people, he would just be terrified. It would be cruel. Cruel. Putting me in a garage was cruel. Throwing my pie in the snow was cruel. Telling the world I was senile so you didn't have to admit you were ashamed of me was the height of cruelty." "I see," Harrington said. "That is a tragedy. I was looking forward to meeting him." "Maybe another time," Derek said, guiding him up the steps, "when he is having a good day. But tonight, let's focus on the future. Let's focus on the partnership." "Yes," Harrington said, though he sounded distracted. "The future." They walked up the stairs. Derek opened the door, and the warm, golden light of the foyer spilled out, swallowing them whole. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing them inside their palace of lies. I was left in the dark. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door. The cold was biting into my fingers, now numbing them. But I didn't move to warm them. I needed the cold. I needed it to sharpen my focus. She had said I didn't know who I was. She had said I was violent. She had buried me alive in a nursing home that didn't exist. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I managed to unlock the screen. I opened my banking app. I looked at the balance. I looked at the portfolio. Freeman Capital, majority shareholder Augustus Freeman. I knew who I was. I stood up. My knees popped loudly in the quiet garage. I brushed the dust off my coat. I straightened my tie. They thought I was a memory, a problem to be managed, a ghost to be hidden away. But ghosts have a way of haunting the people who killed them. I looked at the side door of the garage, the one that led into the mudroom of the house. It was locked from the inside. They had made sure I couldn't get in. But they forgot one thing. I had built this house, not physically but financially. I had reviewed the blueprints when they bought it. I knew the layout better than they did. I knew that the mudroom door had a faulty latch that Derek had been meaning to fix for 6 months but was too lazy to address. I wasn't going to break in, not yet. I was going to wait. Harrington was inside. He was drinking the wine. He was listening to Derek's pitch. He was a good man, a smart man. He would ask questions, and eventually he would need to use the restroom. I knew the powder room on the main floor was out of order. I had seen the plumber's van there yesterday when I drove by to check on things. Derek hadn't approved the repair estimate because he was cheap. That meant any guest needing the facilities would have to use the guest bathroom, the one down the back hallway, the hallway that connected to the garage. I sat back down on my bucket. I crossed my arms. I wasn't a beggar anymore. I was a trap set with patience and baited with the truth. I waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter from the dining room. They were toasting. They were celebrating their cleverness. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the back hallway. The door handle to the garage jiggled. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The door opened, and the light poured in. The dinner party inside the house was reaching a crescendo of self-congratulatory noise. Through the thin drywall that separated the garage from the kitchen, I could hear the clinking of silverware on china and the boom of Derek's voice as he recounted a business triumph that I knew for a fact he had stolen from a junior associate. He was performing. He was dancing for his supper, and the audience was the man who unknowingly worked for me. I sat on my overturned plastic bucket, my back resting against the cold metal of a shelving unit. The temperature in the garage had dropped another 5 degrees. My breath plumed in front of me, a rhythmic fog that matched the beating of my heart. I took a small bite of the dry dinner roll I had salvaged from my pocket. It was stale and hard, but I chewed it slowly, finding a strange comfort in the meager sustenance. It was honest food, unlike the feast being served 20 feet away. I checked my watch. It was the old Timex I wore when I wanted to be invisible, not the Patek Philippe resting in my safe deposit box. 7:45. The main course was being served, the turkey I had paid for, the wine I had imported, the life I had subsidized. Inside the dining room, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of roasted bird and expensive perfume. Mr. Harrington sat at the head of the table, a position Derek had ceded to him in a display of aggressive humility. Harrington was enjoying himself in that polite, detached way of the ultra-wealthy. He complimented the decor, which was mostly leased. He praised the food, which was catered. He was a man who appreciated effort even when he suspected the effort was a facade. But Harrington was also a man of routine. He was meticulous, and after 2 glasses of sparkling water and a glass of the appetizer's white wine, nature made its inevitable demand. I heard the conversation lull through the vent. "Derek, if you would excuse me." Harrington's deep baritone rumbled. "I need to wash my hands." Panic. I could feel the sudden spike in tension through the wall. I knew why. The downstairs powder room, the one with the marble vanity and the gold faucets, was out of order. It had been leaking for 3 weeks. Derek had refused to call a plumber, claiming he could fix it himself to save money. He never did. He had simply locked the door and hung an out-of-order sign on the handle, a perfect metaphor for his entire life. Broken behind a gilded door. "Oh, of course," Sir Derek stammered, his smooth salesman facade cracking slightly. "The main powder room is... Well, we are having the marble resurfaced. It is currently sealed off." He was lying effortlessly. But we have a guest facility down the hall. Derek continued, quickly pointing toward the back of the house. Just go past the kitchen through the mudroom hallway. It is the second door on the left. It is private. Very private. The second door on the left was the laundry room bathroom. It was small, functional, and clean enough, but it was in the service wing of the house. The hallway leading to it was also the hallway that led to the garage. Thank you, Harrington said. I will find my way. Allow me to escort you. Chloe offered her chair, scraping back. No, please, Harrington insisted, waving a hand. Stay. Enjoy your meal. I am perfectly capable of navigating a hallway. Besides, I want to grab that bottle of Chateau Margaux I brought. I left it on the sideboard in the hallway to breathe, but I think it needs decanting now. I prefer to handle the cork myself, if you do not mind. It is a delicate vintage. Of course, Sir Derek said. The decanter is in the kitchen. Just straight back. I heard the heavy footsteps of a man who commanded thousands of employees walking across the hardwood floors. They grew louder as he left the dining room and entered the tiled kitchen. Then the sound changed to the hollow echo of the back corridor. I sat up straighter on my bucket. I brushed the crumbs from my lap. I knew that hallway. There were 3 doors, the pantry, the laundry room, and the garage. Harrington was walking toward me. He was carrying the bottle, the $5,000 bottle of wine. He was likely looking for the kitchen or the bathroom, but in a house he didn't know, all doors looked the same. The footsteps stopped. He was right outside the garage door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned. It wasn't the bathroom. He had made a mistake. A simple human error that was about to shatter my son-in-law's universe. The door swung open. The sudden influx of light from the hallway was blinding compared to the gloom of the garage. I squinted, raising a hand to shield my eyes. The silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man filled the frame. He was holding a bottle of wine by the neck like a club. He took a step inside, expecting tiles and a sink. Instead, his Italian leather shoe landed on oil-stained concrete. He froze. The smell of gasoline and garbage hit him. He blinked his eyes, adjusting to the darkness. He looked around confused. He saw the luxury sedan parked a few feet away. He saw the stacks of cardboard boxes. And then he saw me. I was sitting in the corner, wrapped in my old coat, shivering slightly, my breath misting in the cold air. I held a half-eaten piece of dry bread in one hand. I looked like a squatter. I looked like a beggar who had broken in to escape the winter. Harrington frowned. He took a step closer, squinting. "Excuse me," he said, his voice uncertain. I seemed to be lost. I was looking, and he stopped. He leaned in. The light from the hallway caught my face. It illuminated the scar above my left eyebrow, a souvenir from a construction accident 40 years ago. It illuminated my eyes that he had looked into across boardroom tables for a decade, eyes that had approved his hiring, his promotions, his entire career. I didn't look away. I didn't cower. I looked back at him with the calm, steady gaze of the chairman. "Hello, Gerald," I said softly. The name hung in the freezing air. Nobody called him Gerald. To the world, he was Mr. Harrington or Sir or CEO. Only 3 people called him Gerald. His wife, his mother, and me. His mouth fell open. The color drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale. He took another step, his brain struggling to process the impossible data it was receiving. He was looking at the founder of Freeman Capital, the man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the man whose portrait hung in the lobby of his office building, sitting on a plastic bucket in a freezing garage, eating scraps. "Chairman Freeman," he whispered. The words came out as a gasp, a question, and a prayer all at once. He started to shake. It wasn't from the cold. It was from the sheer cognitive dissonance. "Sir," he stammered, taking a step forward, his hand reaching out as if to verify that I was real and not a hallucination brought on by the stress of the merger. "Sir, why are you—" He looked at my coat. He looked at the bread. He looked at the trash bags piled next to me. Then he looked back at the door leading to the warm dining room where Derek sat drinking wine. He realized. In one terrifying second, the pieces clicked together, the deflection, the senile old man story, the refusal to let him meet the father-in-law, the private room in the garage. "You are the father?" he said, his voice rising in horror. "You are Chloe's father." I nodded slowly. "I am." "And they put you in here," he choked out. "They said I didn't belong at the table," I said simply. "They said I would embarrass them." Harrington looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face twisted with a mixture of rage and profound shame. He looked at the bottle of wine in his hand, the Chateau Margaux, the gift he had brought to honor the host who had locked his own boss in a freezing garage. He looked at the bottle as if it were a poisonous snake. This is yours, he said. Everything. It is all yours. Technically, yes, I said. Harrington's hand trembled. The bottle slipped. It wasn't a fumble. It was a release. He let go of it. The bottle hit the concrete floor. It shattered with a sound like a gunshot exploding into 1,000 glittering shards of dark glass. The wine, the deep red vintage that had aged for decades, splashed across the floor, soaking the cuffs of his trousers and staining the oil spots like fresh blood. The smell of expensive grapes and alcohol filled the small room instantly, overpowering the smell of gasoline. Harrington didn't even look down. He didn't care about the wine. He didn't care about his shoes. He dropped to his knees. He fell to the dirty concrete floor right in the puddle of wine and glass, ignoring the sharp fragments that must have been biting into his skin. He bowed his head, his posture one of absolute submission and apology. "Chairman," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Augustus, I didn't know. If I had known you were here, if I had known they were treating you like this, I would have torn this house down with my bare hands." I looked down at him. This was the CEO of a billion-dollar company kneeling in a garage. This was respect. This was loyalty. This was what Derek would never understand. "Stand up, Gerald," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You are ruining your suit." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I am ashamed, sir. I am ashamed to be eating their food while you sit in the cold. It is not your fault," I said. "You were a guest, just like me." "I am not a guest," he said, standing up, his jaw set in a hard line. "Not anymore. I am your employee. And I am about to tender my resignation from this dinner party." He reached out a hand to help me up. I took it. His grip was strong, warm, and reassuring. He pulled me to my feet. My legs were stiff, but I stood tall. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked, dusting off my coat with his own hands. "Are you hurt?" "My pride is bruised," I said, "but my memory is excellent." Harrington nodded grimly. He looked at the door leading back to the house. The laughter was still drifting down the hallway. Derek and Chloe were still celebrating, oblivious to the bomb that had just gone off in their garage. "What are your orders?" Sir Harrington asked. He stood at attention, waiting for the command. He wasn't asking as a friend. He was asking as a soldier waiting for the general. I brushed the crumbs from my jacket. I straightened my tie. I looked at the door. "I am hungry, Gerald," I said, "and I believe there is a seat open at the head of the table." Harrington smiled. It was a wolf smile, a smile that promised retribution. "After you, Mr. Chairman," he said, holding the door open. I walked past him. I stepped out of the garage. I stepped out of the cold. I stepped into the light of the hallway, the smell of wine and vengeance trailing behind me. I walked toward the dining room. My footsteps were silent on the runner, but the impact of my arrival was going to be deafening. Harrington followed a step behind me, his face set in stone. The tea party was over. The Titan had arrived. The silence in the garage was broken only by the sound of Harrington's heavy breathing. He was still kneeling in the puddle of wine, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his realization. He was a proud man, a man who had built his own fortune on the back of my investment, but in this moment he was just a soldier who had found his general in the trenches. "Get up, Gerald," I said again, extending my hand. He took it. His grip was firm, but his palm was cold. He pulled himself up, wincing as the glass shards ground beneath his knees. He looked down at his ruined suit, the dark red stains spreading up his pant legs like a wound. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of awe and fury. "I have to tell them," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I have to go back in there and tell them who you are. I will fire him on the spot. I will destroy him." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "Not yet." Harrington blinked. "Sir, if you fire him now, he learns nothing," I said, my voice low and steady. "He will just think he had bad luck. He will think he was a victim of circumstance. I need him to understand exactly why his world is ending. I need him to see the architecture of his own demise." "What do you want me to do?" Harrington asked. Go back inside, I said. Sit down at the table, act like nothing happened. Tell them you dropped the wine. Tell them it was an accident. And you? He asked, looking at my old coat, at the bread in my hand. I am coming with you, I said. Harrington's eyes widened. Sir, they will throw you out. Derek, he is volatile when he is embarrassed. Let him try, I said. I built this company, Gerald. I think I can handle a middle manager with a gambling problem. Harrington straightened his tie. He brushed the glass from his knees. He took a deep breath, composing himself, transforming back into the CEO, the titan of industry. After you, Mr. Chairman, he said, opening the door to the hallway. We walked down the corridor. The laughter from the dining room was louder now, raucous and self-satisfied. They were drunk on my wine and their own arrogance. I could hear Derek's voice, booming and confident. And then I told the client, Derek was saying, if you want quality, you have to pay for it. That is the Stanton way. That is the Harrington way. He was using my name. He was using my philosophy to sell his lies. We reached the doorway of the dining room. The light was warm and golden, reflecting off the crystal and the silver. The table was laden with food. The turkey was carved. The sides were steaming. Harrington stepped into the room first. Ah, there he is, Derek shouted, raising his glass. The man of the hour. We were just... Mr. Harrington. What happened? The room went silent. Everyone stared at Harrington's pants. They were soaked in red wine, dark and ominous. I had a mishap. Harrington said, his voice tight. The bottle slipped. I am terribly sorry. Oh my God, Chloe shrieked, jumping up. Your suit, it is ruined. Derek, get a towel, get some club soda. It is fine, Harrington said, waving them off. He walked to his chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit down. He stood there, gripping the back of the chair, his knuckles white. Sir, are you okay? Derek asked, looking confused. You look pale. I am fine, Harrington said. But I found something. Or rather, someone. He looked at the doorway. I stepped into the light. I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked into the dining room with my head high, my old coat open, revealing the simple flannel shirt underneath. I held my cane in one hand and the half-eaten roll in the other. The reaction was instantaneous. Chloe dropped her fork. It clattered onto her china plate with a sharp ping. Her face drained of color. She looked from me to Harrington, then back to me, terror dawning in her eyes. Derek's reaction was different. It was violent. You, he roared, slamming his hand onto the table. What are you doing here? I told you to stay in the garage. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He marched toward me, his face twisted in rage. You old fool, he shouted. You are ruining everything. Look at you. You are filthy. Get out right now. He reached for me. He was going to grab me. He was going to throw me out physically in front of his boss, in front of his guests. Derek, no, Chloe screamed, standing up. But Derek was past hearing. He was fueled by shame and alcohol. He lunged. Security, he yelled. Call the police. This man is trespassing. His hand was inches from my chest. Stop! The voice was a thunderclap. It didn't come from me. It came from the head of the table. Harrington slammed his fist onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. Do not touch him, Harrington roared. Do not dare lay a hand on him. Derek froze. He looked back at his boss, confused. Sir, Derek stammered. He is just a beggar. He is my wife's father. He is senile. He wandered in from the garage. I am just removing him. He is not a beggar, Harrington said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. And he is certainly not senile. Harrington walked around the table. He moved with a speed that belied his age. He walked right past Derek, ignoring him completely. He walked up to me. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't pat me on the back. He bowed. It was a deep, formal bow, a bow of absolute respect. Mr. Chairman, Harrington said, his voice loud and clear in the silent room. I apologize for the delay. I did not know you were conducting a field inspection. The room stopped breathing. Derek looked at Harrington. He looked at me. He looked back at Harrington. Chairman, Derek whispered. What are you talking about? He is a bus driver. Harrington straightened up. He turned to face Derek. His eyes were cold, hard flint. Bus driver, Harrington asked. Is that what he told you? He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Derek, Harrington said. This is Augustus Freeman, the founder of Freeman Capital, the majority shareholder of the conglomerate you work for, the man who signs my paycheck, and yours." Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been hit with a sledgehammer. "No," he wheezed. "No, that is impossible. He lives in a dump. He drives a beater." "He lives modestly," Harrington corrected, "because he chooses to, because he values character over flash, unlike some people." Chloe let out a sob. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. She knew. Deep down, she had always suspected there was more to me, but she had chosen to ignore it. She had chosen the easy lie over the hard truth. "Dad," she whispered through her fingers, "is it true?" I looked at her. I didn't answer her. I looked at Derek. "You said I didn't belong here," I said, my voice calm, the voice of the man who built an empire. "You said I was a nuisance. You said I was dead weight." I took a step forward. Derek shrank back. "I built this company, Derek," I said. "I built the desk you sit at. I built the office you work in. I built the bonus structure that paid for this house." I pointed to the table. "I paid for this turkey," I said. "I paid for this wine. I paid for the clothes on your back." I leaned in close to his face. "And you put me in a garage," I whispered, "next to the garbage." Derek was shaking. He looked at Harrington, pleading with his eyes. "Sir, please," he begged. "I didn't know. Nobody told me. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Harrington asked, incredulous. "You locked the chairman of the board in an unheated garage on Thanksgiving. You fed him stale bread while you drank his wine. That is not a misunderstanding, Derek. That is a resignation letter." "No," Derek cried. "You can't fire me. I am the top salesman. I am the VP." "You are nothing," I said. "You are a man who measures worth by the price of a suit. And tonight your suit is empty." I looked at the table. I looked at the empty chair at the head. "Gerald," I said to Harrington, "I believe that is my seat." "Yes, sir," Harrington said, pulling out the chair. "Please." I walked to the head of the table. I sat down. The chair was comfortable. It was leather. It was the seat of power. I looked at the guests. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my son-in-law, who was standing there broken and pale. "Sit down, Derek," I said. "We have a lot to discuss, and I think you are going to want to hear this." Derek sat. He collapsed into his chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Now," I said, picking up a linen napkin and placing it on my lap. "Pass the potatoes." The dinner had begun, but for Derek the feast was over. The silence in the dining room was absolute, a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out, leaving only the heavy, suffocating weight of the truth. Derek Stanton sat frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting back and forth between me and Mr. Harrington as if trying to find the punchline to a joke that wasn't funny. Chloe was paler than the linen napkins, her hands pressed to her mouth, her perfectly applied lipstick smudged by the sheer shock of the moment. The guests, the elite of Connecticut society, the people Derek had spent his entire adult life trying to impress, were staring at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. The old man in the flannel shirt, the beggar from the garage, was suddenly the center of the universe. Chairman Derek whispered the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. Chairman Freeman. He looked at Harrington, desperate for a denial, desperate for his boss to laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. But Harrington's face was stone. He stood beside my chair, his posture deferential, his expression one of cold, professional fury. "Yes," Derek Harrington said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Chairman Augustus Freeman, the founder of Freeman Capital, the man who built the very desk you sit at, the man whose name is on the building you walk into every morning." Derek shook his head, a jerky mechanical motion. But that is impossible. He is Gus. He is a bus driver. He lives in a dump. He borrows money from me. I never borrowed money from you." "Derek," I said, my voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room, "I accepted your charity because it made you feel big, but I never asked for it. He is my father-in-law," Chloe stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "He is just my dad. He can't be the chairman." Harrington turned to her, his eyes filled with a disappointment so profound it was almost pity. "Mrs. Stanton," he said, Your father owns 60% of the voting shares of Freeman Capital. He is the majority shareholder of the conglomerate that owns Stanton Industries, the company your husband works for. He is not just the chairman. He is the architect of everything you see around you. He gestured to the room, to the expensive furniture, to the crystal chandelier, to the very walls of the house. Derek stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "No. This is a trick. This is some kind of sick joke. He is a nobody. Look at him. Look at his clothes. Look at his shoes." Harrington stepped forward, his face hardening. "You judge a man by his shoes?" Derek Harrington asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that how you evaluate worth? Is that how you measure value? Because if it is, you are the poorest man in this room." Derek pointed a shaking finger at me. "He tricked me," he screamed. "He lied. He pretended to be poor. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone hide that kind of money?" "Because I wanted to know who you were," I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I looked directly at Derek, ignoring Chloe, ignoring the guests. I focused all my attention on the man who had called me a beggar. "I wanted to know if you were a good man, Derek," I said. "I wanted to know if you loved my daughter for who she was or for what she could give you. I wanted to know if you would treat a poor man with the same respect you treat a rich man." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And I got my answer," I said. Derek's face flushed a deep, ugly red. You tested me. You played me. I observed you. I corrected him. I watched you climb. I watched you spend. I watched you treat your subordinates like dirt. And I watched you treat me like a stain on your carpet." I stood up. My legs were stiff, but I stood tall. I walked around the table slowly, my old boots thudding softly on the hardwood floor. I stopped behind Derek's chair. I put a hand on the back of it. "You said I was homeless," I said. "You said I didn't belong here." I looked around the room, at the crown molding at the French doors, at the marble fireplace. "Do you know who owns this house, Derek?" I asked. "We do," Derek spat. "We bought it. We pay the mortgage." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You pay a mortgage," I said. "To whom?" "To the bank," he said. "To First National." "And who owns First National's mortgage division?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "Freeman Capital acquired First National's residential portfolio 5 years ago," I said. "I own the note on this house, Derek. And do you know why the interest rate is so low? Do you know why you got approved despite your credit score being mediocre at best?" He stared at me, the blood draining from his face again. "Because I approved it," I said. "I signed off on the loan. I told the underwriters to overlook your debt-to-income ratio. I told them to give you a chance." I looked at Chloe. She was weeping silently, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "And the down payment," I continued. "The $100,000 you said was a bonus from work." Chloe looked up, her eyes wide. That was a bonus. It was a gift," I said. "From me. I funneled it through the payroll department as a performance incentive. I wanted you to have a home, Chloe. I wanted you to be safe. You paid for the house," she whispered. "I paid for everything I said. The cars, the vacations, the country club membership. Every time Derek got a bonus, every time he got a raise, it was me. It was me moving money from my account to yours, trying to give you the life you wanted." "Why?" Derek whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because she is my daughter," I said, pointing at Chloe. "And I loved her. And I hoped that if I gave you enough, if I made your life easy enough, maybe you would stop being so angry. Maybe you would stop being so hungry. Maybe you would learn to be kind." I looked at Harrington. "But I was wrong," I said. "Money doesn't change people, Derek. It just magnifies them. It made you louder. It made you meaner. And it made you blind." I turned back to Derek. "You called me a vagrant tonight," I said. "You put me in a garage. You fed me scraps. I didn't know," Derek shouted, his voice desperate. "I didn't know who you were. That is the point." I roared, my voice filling the room, making the crystal glasses tremble. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me like a human being. You shouldn't need a bank statement to show respect to your father-in-law." I walked back to the head of the table. I looked at the turkey sitting there cold and uncarved. I looked at the wine stain on the floor. "You wanted a VIP guest," I said. "You wanted someone important." I spread my arms. "Well, here I am. I am the chairman of the board. I am the majority shareholder. I am the landlord. And I am the father you betrayed. Is that important enough for you, Derek? The room was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. They were witnessing a dissection, a dismantling of a man's soul. Derek slumped in his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. But there was still a flicker of defiance in his eyes, a flicker of the con man who thinks he can still talk his way out of the trap. So what he said, his voice sullen. So you are rich. So what? You tricked us. You lied to us for years. That is sick, Gus. That is twisted. It is protective, I said. And it is over. I looked at Harrington. Gerald, I said. I believe we have some business to discuss. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Harrington said, stepping forward. I looked at Derek. You are fired, I said. Derek laughed a short, incredulous bark. You can't fire me. I am the director of sales. I have a contract. I have rights. Your contract has a morality clause, Harrington said, pulling a document from his inside pocket. It states that any employee who engages in conduct that brings disrepute to the company or demonstrates a lack of ethical judgment can be terminated immediately with cause. Locking the chairman in a garage constitutes a lack of ethical judgment, I would say, I noted. And stealing, Harrington added. Stealing, Derek shouted, standing up. I never stole anything. Harrington opened a folder he had brought with him. He placed a stack of papers on the table. These are your expense reports, Derek, Harrington said. For the last 2 years. Derek went pale. You have been charging personal expenses to the corporate card, Harrington said. Dinners, vacations, jewelry. That is client entertainment, Derek stammered. A trip to Cabo with your mistress is not client entertainment, Harrington said. Mistress Chloe gasped. The room erupted. The guests gasped. Chloe looked at Derek, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Mistress, she screamed. You have a mistress. Derek looked at her, then at Harrington, then at me. He was cornered. He was exposed. It was one time he lied weakly. It was 12 times, Harrington corrected. And you paid for the hotel rooms with the company card. And you bought her a diamond bracelet with the company card. $20,000, I added. I saw the receipt. Chloe stood up. She grabbed a wine glass full of red wine. She threw it in Derek's face. You pig, she screamed. You lying, cheating pig. Derek wiped the wine from his eyes. He looked at me with pure hatred. You did this, he snarled. You ruined my life. You ruined your own life, son, I said calmly. I just turned on the lights. I looked at the guests. I think this dinner is over, I said. Please leave. The guests didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for their coats, eager to escape the blast zone. They hurried out the door, whispering and shaking their heads, leaving the Stanton family alone in the ruins of their Thanksgiving. When the last guest had gone, the house was quiet. The only sound was Chloe sobbing at the table. I walked over to her. I put a hand on her shoulder. Chloe, I said softly. She looked up at me. Her face was streaked with mascara. Her eyes were filled with pain. But I didn't see repentance. I saw anger. You knew, she whispered. You knew he was cheating. I suspected, I said. The audit confirmed it yesterday. Why didn't you tell me, she cried, pulling away from my touch. Why did you let me live a lie? Because you wouldn't have listened, I said. You were too busy looking at the car. You were too busy looking at the house. You were too busy trying to be Mrs. Stanton. You had to see it for yourself. She looked at Derek, who was sitting at the other end of the table, head in his hands. Get out, she said to him. Derek looked up. What? Get out of my house, she screamed. Your house. Derek laughed a bitter, broken sound. It isn't your house, Chloe. It is his house. He pointed at me. He owns it. He owns us. We are just squatters. He is right, Chloe, I said. The house belongs to the trust, and the trust has strict rules about occupancy. Rules, she asked, wiping her eyes. Rule number 1, I said. No traitors. I looked at both of them. You have 1 hour, I said, to pack your things, to get out. Dad, Chloe pleaded. You can't be serious. Where will I go? I don't know, I said. Maybe you can go to the garage. It is heated. Mostly. She flinched. She remembered. You are kicking me out, she whispered. Your own daughter. I am kicking out the woman who let her husband abuse her father, I said. I am kicking out the woman who was ashamed of me. I turned to leave. 1 hour, I said. or I call the police. And Derek, the police are already on their way for the embezzlement. Derek's head snapped up. Run, I suggested, though I doubt you will get far in the snow. I walked toward the door. Harrington followed me. We walked out into the cold night air. The snow was still falling, covering the world in a clean white blanket. I took a deep breath. It hurt, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. I had lost a daughter. I had lost a son-in-law. But I had found myself again. And that was something to be thankful for. The heavy oak chair at the head of the table groaned slightly as I pulled it out. It was Derek's chair, his throne, his seat of power. I sat down deliberately, my movements slow and measured. The leather was still warm from where he had been sitting, but the heat vanished under my touch. I placed my hands on the table, palms flat, fingers splayed. My calluses scraped against the fine linen tablecloth, a tactile reminder of the work that had paid for every thread. I looked around the room. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, but my gaze was steady, fixed on the two people who had betrayed me. Sit down, Gerald, I said, gesturing to the chair on my right. Harrington nodded and sat. He didn't slouch. He sat with the posture of a man who knew his place in the hierarchy. He opened his leather portfolio and placed a tablet on the table, the screen glowing with cold, hard data. Derek made a move toward the chair opposite me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Don't sit, I said. Derek froze halfway into a crouch. He looked at me, then at Harrington, then at Chloe. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been tangled. What he whispered. I said, don't sit, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. You don't get to sit. Not at this table, not anymore. But this is my house, Derek stammered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. This is my dinner. It is your house in name only, I said, and it is your dinner only because I paid for it, so you will stand, both of you. Chloe let out a small, strangled sob. Dad, please. You are embarrassing us. Embarrassing you? I asked, leaning forward. You put me in a garage, Chloe. You fed me bread scraps. You told me I was a homeless bum. And now you are embarrassed because I won't let you sit in a chair. She flinched, recoiling as if I had slapped her. She grabbed Derek's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. They stood there, huddled together at the foot of the table like naughty children called to the principal's office. But this wasn't detention. This was an audit. Harrington, I said, not taking my eyes off Derek. The file, please. Harrington tapped his tablet. File loaded, sir. I looked at Derek. He was sweating now, the moisture beading on his forehead and dripping down his temple. He knew. Deep down in the lizard part of his brain, he knew the game was up. Let's talk about lifestyle, Derek. I began, my voice conversational, almost pleasant. You have a very nice life here. The house, the clothes, the car. I pointed toward the window where the red Porsche was parked in the driveway, gleaming under the security lights. That is a 2024 Porsche 911 Carrera, I noted. Base price $114,000. With the options you added, the leather interior, the sport package, probably closer to $150,000. Derek swallowed hard. I got a good deal. It is a lease. A lease, I said, nodding. Even a lease requires a down payment, and monthly payments. About $2,000 a month, I would guess. Plus insurance, plus gas. I looked at Harrington. Gerald, what is the base salary for a regional sales director at Stanton Industries? Harrington didn't even look at the screen. He knew the numbers. $85,000 a year, sir, before taxes. $85,000, I repeated. Let's do some math, Derek. After taxes, that is maybe $60,000 take home, $5,000 a month. I picked up a crystal wine glass, turning it in the light. Your mortgage is $4,000 a month, I said. Your car is $2,000. That is $6,000 right there. You are negative $1,000 a month before you even buy a loaf of bread, before you pay the electric bill, before you buy... I gestured at Chloe's dress. A $4,000 gown for a Thanksgiving dinner. Derek was shaking. His hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides. I have bonuses, he blurted out. I have commissions. I had a great year. Did you? I asked. I looked at Harrington. Show him Gerald. Harrington swiped on the tablet. He turned the screen so Derek could see. It was a graph, a red line plummeting downward. Your sales figures are down 40% year over year, Derek Harrington said, his voice dry and factual. You haven't hit a quota in 6 months. In fact, you have the lowest performance rating in the entire division. That data is wrong, Derek argued, his voice rising in panic. The market is tough. Everyone is down. Everyone else is up 10%, Harrington corrected. So I continued, ignoring his excuses. You make $85,000 a year. You spend, what, $200,000, $300. I looked at Chloe. She was staring at Derek, horror dawning on her face. She didn't know. She thought he was a genius. She thought the money was magic. Where did the money come from, Derek? I asked softly. He didn't answer. He couldn't. I will tell you where it came from, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. Copies. I threw them onto the table. They scattered across the linen like dead leaves. Credit card statements, I said. Corporate credit card statements. Derek's eyes bulged. He lunged for the papers, but I slammed my hand down on them. Don't touch them, I roared. He recoiled, stumbling back into Chloe. Harrington read the highlights I ordered. Harrington picked up a sheet. June 12th, he read. 4 Seasons Maui. Penthouse suite. 7 nights. $14,000. Marked as Client Acquisition Retreat. There were no clients on that trip, I said, looking at Chloe. Just you two. I saw the Instagram photos. Very romantic. August 4th. Harrington continued. Cartier. Diamond bracelet. $6,000. Marked as Employee Recognition Gift. Chloe looked down at her wrist. She was wearing the bracelet. October 15th. Harrington read. The Porsche dealership. Down payment. $20,000. Marked as Fleet Vehicle Maintenance. Derek was hyperventilating now. He was gasping for air, his tie loosened, his face pale. Stop, he wheezed. Please stop. We are not done, I said. November 1st. Harrington read, his voice turning icy. Withdrawal. Cash. $50,000, marked as petty cash. $50,000, I repeated. Cash. Where did that go, Derek? He didn't answer. He looked at the floor. I know where it went, I said. It went to a bookie in Atlantic City. To pay off your gambling debt. Again. Chloe screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure shock. Gambling, she gasped. You told me you quit. You swore. I did quit, Derek yelled, turning on her. I tried. But the interest, it kept growing. I had to pay them. They were going to hurt me. So you stole from the company, I said. You stole from me. I didn't know it was you, Derek screamed, his eyes wild. I thought it was just a corporation, a faceless entity. I didn't know it was my father-in-law's money. Does that make it better? I asked quietly. Does theft become noble if the victim is a stranger? He fell silent. He slumped against the sideboard, defeated. Total misappropriation, Harrington announced, putting the tablet down. $215,000 in 6 months. That is grand larceny, Derek. That is federal prison time. Prison, Chloe whispered. Yes, prison, I said. And not a nice one. I stood up. I walked around the table. I stood in front of them. You called me a bum, I said. You called me a vagrant. You thought you were better than me because you wore a suit and I wore a jacket. I poked Derek in the chest with my finger. But this suit, I said, pointing to his clothes. Stolen. This house. Stolen. This food. Stolen. You are not a businessman, Derek. You are a thief. A common petty thief playing dress-up. I turned to Chloe. And you, I said. You let him do it. You didn't ask questions. You saw the money, and you looked the other way. You treated your own father like dirt because you thought you had found a better meal ticket. Dad. I didn't know, she sobbed, grabbing my hand. I swear. I thought he was successful. You didn't want to know, I said, pulling my hand away. You wanted the fairy tale. Well, welcome to the end of the story. I looked at the clock on the wall. It is 9 o'clock, I said. I looked at Harrington. Gerald, execute the order. Harrington nodded. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. What order? Derek asked, looking terrified. The termination order, I said. I walked back to the head of the table. You are fired, Derek, I said. Effective immediately. Your access to the building is revoked. Your company phone is disabled. Your company car, the Porsche, is being repossessed as we speak. No. Derek cried, running to the window. He looked out. A tow truck was backing into the driveway. A man was hooking chains to the bumper of the red sports car. "My car," he wailed. "Not your car," I said. "My car." "And one more thing," I added. I looked at the house. This house is owned by a subsidiary of Freeman Capital. It is corporate housing, assigned to the director of sales. Derek looked at me, his eyes wide. "Since you are no longer the director of sales," I said, "you are trespassing." I checked my watch. "You have 1 hour," I said. "Pack your bags. Get out." "Where will we go?" Chloe cried. "I don't know," I said, sitting back down in my chair. "Maybe you can go to the garage. I hear it is very private." The room fell silent. The only sound was the weeping of my daughter and the heavy breathing of the man who had lost everything. They stood there paralyzed by the magnitude of their destruction. "Tick-tock," I said. And then I picked up my fork. I took a bite of the turkey. It was cold, but it tasted like justice. The air in the dining room had turned so cold it felt like the windows had shattered, letting the winter storm rage directly over the turkey and the fine china. Derek sat slumped in his chair, his face a portrait of ruin, the sweat on his forehead gleaming under the chandelier light like the condensation on a glass of poison. He looked at the credit card statements scattered across the table, then at Mr. Harrington, and finally terrified at me. The arrogance that had defined him for 5 years, the sneer he wore every time he looked at my old coat, had evaporated. In its place was the raw, naked fear of a man watching the guillotine blade hang suspended above his neck. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The evidence screamed loud enough for everyone. I leaned back in the head chair, the leather creaking in the silence, and looked at the man who had married my daughter. I saw the weakness in his jaw, the shifting of his eyes. I saw a man who had built a castle out of sand and was shocked when the tide finally came in. "Derek." I said, my voice low and steady, carrying the weight of the 60% share I held in his world. "You seem to have a misunderstanding about how this company operates. You seem to think that because you married a Freeman, the corporate treasury is your personal piggy bank. You seem to think that ethics are a suggestion and that loyalty is a joke." I paused, letting him squirm. "Mr. Harrington?" I continued, not taking my eyes off my son-in-law. "What is the standard protocol for an executive found embezzling company funds for personal luxury?" Harrington didn't hesitate. His voice was sharp, a military strike. "Immediate termination for cause revocation of all unvested stock options and a referral to the legal department for criminal prosecution and asset recovery." I nodded slowly. "You heard him, Derek." Derek's hands began to shake violently. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. But Dad, Gus, you can't do that. We are family. This is just... It is a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back. I swear. It was a loan, a temporary loan. It was theft." I corrected him, my voice hardening. "And as of this moment, you are fired, immediately. You are no longer the regional sales director. You are no longer an employee of Stanton Industries. Your access cards are deactivated. Your company phone is a brick. And come Monday morning, the legal team will be filing a civil suit to recover every cent you stole alongside the criminal report the police are already processing." The word "fired" hung in the air like a gunshot. Derek flinched physically as if I had struck him. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an exit, searching for an ally. But there were no allies here. The guests had fled. Harrington was my soldier. And Chloe. Chloe was staring at him with a look of dawning horror. Derek stood up, his legs wobbling. He looked at the door, then back at me. He realized there was nowhere to run. The walls of his deception had closed in. And then he did something that made my stomach turn. He didn't stand tall. He didn't accept his fate with dignity. He collapsed. He fell to his knees on the hardwood floor right beside my chair. He grabbed the fabric of my trousers with his sweaty hands, sobbing like a child who had been caught stealing candy. "Dad, please," he wailed, the sound pathetic and high-pitched. "Please don't do this. You can't fire me. I have a mortgage. I have lease payments. If I lose this job, I lose everything. I will be on the street." "You should have thought about that before you booked a penthouse suite in Maui on my dime," I said, pulling my leg away from his grasp. "I am sorry, I am so sorry," he cried, tears streaming down his face, ruining the expensive collar of his shirt. "But you have to understand, it wasn't just me. I didn't want to do it. I was pressured." I frowned. "Pressured, yes. It was the pressure, he shouted, desperate to find a scapegoat, desperate to shift the crosshairs off his own chest. He pointed a shaking finger across the table. It was her. It was Chloe. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Me! Yes, you! Derek screamed, turning his tear-streaked face toward his wife. You are never satisfied. You always want more. You wanted the big house. You wanted the Porsche. You wanted the vacations. You told me I wasn't a man if I couldn't give you the lifestyle you deserved. Derek, what are you saying? Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. I am saying I did it for you. Derek yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. I stole that money to keep you happy, to keep you from nagging me about why we weren't members of the country club yet, to stop you from looking at your friends' Instagrams and complaining that our life wasn't good enough. It is your fault, Chloe. You drove me to this. I watched him disgusted. A man who blames his wife for his own crimes is no man at all. He was a coward scraping the bottom of the barrel for an excuse. Chloe stood up, her chair tipping over backward with a loud crash. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had defended against me for 5 years, the man she had put on a pedestal while she kicked me to the curb. You liar, she choked out. You told me you were a genius. You told me you were a partner. You said the money came from your bonuses. You said you were a tycoon. I had to lie. Derek shot back, scrambling to his feet, his face twisted and ugly. Because you wouldn't have looked at me twice if I told you the truth. You are shallow, Chloe. You are obsessed with status. If I told you I was just a mid-level manager making 80 grand a year, you would have left me. So I became what you wanted. I became the big shot. And now you are going to let me take the fall for it. He turned back to me, his hands clasped in prayer. Dad, you see what I am dealing with. She demands everything. The clothes, the jewelry, the parties. I was just trying to keep my family together. I was trying to be the provider. Please, Gus, don't destroy me for trying to love your daughter. Punish her. She is the one who spent the money. The room fell silent again, save for Derek's ragged breathing. Chloe stood there, shaking, her world disintegrating. She looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one Harrington had identified as an illicit purchase. She looked at the house around her. She realized in a terrifying rush that everything she owned, everything she was built on a crime. You told me you handled it, she whispered, her voice breaking. You told me my father was a loser. You told me he was a burden. You said we didn't need him because you were the new king. I said what I had to say, Derek shouted. You liar. Chloe screamed, grabbing a wine glass and hurling it at him. It shattered against his shoulder, spraying red wine over his white shirt like a gunshot wound. You fraud. You made me treat my father like garbage because I thought you were better than him. I thought you were the success story. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, making her look like a tragic clown. Dad, she sobbed. Dad, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. He told me he was rich. He told me he was buying the company. He said you were just an old man who got in the way. I looked at her. My daughter. The girl I had raised. I saw the regret in her eyes, but I also saw the selfishness that had allowed her to be blind for so long. She hadn't asked questions when the expensive gifts arrived. She hadn't wondered how a sales manager could afford a $2 million home. She had taken the luxury and looked the other way, and now she was crying because the bill had come due. I looked at Derek, cowering by the sideboard, wine dripping from his shirt, blaming everyone but himself. I looked at Harrington, who stood ready to execute my will. Enough, I slammed my hand on the table. The sound cracked like thunder, silencing their screaming match instantly. They both froze, looking at me. I stood up slowly. I didn't look like a vagrant anymore. I didn't look like a beggar. I looked like the man who owned the building, the land, and the debt. Be quiet, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Both of you. I walked around the table. I stopped between them. I looked at Derek, then at Chloe. You want to blame each other, I asked. You want to point fingers, fine. But let me tell you what I see. I pointed at Derek. I see a thief, I said. A weak, spineless thief who stole from the hand that fed him and then tried to hide behind his wife's skirt when he got caught. You didn't steal for love, Derek. You stole for ego. You stole because you wanted to feel big. You wanted to play the big man in front of your boss, in front of the neighbors. And you used my money to do it. I turned to Chloe. She flinched as my gaze landed on her. And you, I said, I see a fool, a greedy, shallow fool. You let this man poison you against your own blood. You let him convince you that your father was worthless just because I didn't wear a flashy suit. You took the jewelry, you took the vacations, and you never once asked where it came from. You didn't care as long as it kept coming. Dad, no, she whimpered. Yes, I roared. You stood on that porch tonight and told me I didn't belong here. You told me I was an embarrassment. You were ashamed of me because you thought I was poor. But the moment you find out I have money, suddenly, I am Dad again. Suddenly you are sorry. I shook my head, the disappointment tasting bitter in my mouth. You aren't sorry you hurt me, Chloe. You are sorry the ride is over. I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up the file Harrington had brought. You are both the same, I said. You deserve each other. You are parasites. You feed on the host until there is nothing left, and then you complain that the host wasn't juicy enough. Well, the host is done, I said. I looked at Derek. Get out, I said. Derek blinked. What? Get out of my house, I said. Your house, he stammered. But the deed is held by a trust, I said. A trust controlled by Freeman Capital. This is company housing Derek. And since you are no longer an employee, you are trespassing. I checked my watch. You have 1 hour, I said. 1 hour to pack your personal effects, not the company assets, not the TV, not the furniture, not the artwork, just your clothes, and then you leave. Where Derek cried, Where am I supposed to go? It is snowing. I don't know, I said, sitting back down and picking up my fork. Maybe you can go to the garage. I hear it is very cozy this time of year. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He looked at Harrington, but the CEO just crossed his arms and stared him down. Derek turned and ran. He ran up the stairs, sobbing defeated. Chloe stood there trembling. She looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought because she was my daughter, she was safe. She thought blood would save her. Dad, she whispered. What about me? I can stay, right? I can divorce him. I can fix this. I looked at her. I loved her. I would always love her. But I couldn't save her from herself. Not anymore. If I let her stay, she would never learn. She would never grow. She would just find another Derek. I picked up a piece of turkey. I didn't look at her. You heard me, Chloe, I said. Her face crumpled. Dad, no. You can't mean that. I have nowhere to go. You have a degree, I said. You have 2 hands. You have the lessons I taught you before you decided they weren't good enough. But it is. Thanksgiving, she wailed. Yes, I said, and I am giving you something to be thankful for. I am giving you the truth. I pointed to the door. Go with your husband, Chloe. Or go alone. I don't care. But you are not staying here. She stared at me for a long moment, waiting for me to crack. Waiting for the old soft Gus to appear. But Gus was gone. The chairman was in the chair. She let out a sob that sounded like something breaking. She turned and ran up the stairs after Derek. The room was silent again, just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of the wind outside. Harrington sat down. He poured a glass of wine. That was hard, sir, he said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. I took a bite of the turkey. It was cold. It was dry. But as I sat there in the house, I owned, freed from the lies that had choked it for years. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. I had cut out the rot. Now the healing could begin. But first I had to watch them leave. I had to watch them walk out into the cold reality they had created. And I wouldn't blink. Get out of my house, Derek stammered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and lingering arrogance as he tried to stand up from the floor where he had been kneeling. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing the tears and sweat into a mask of pathetic defiance. Get out right now, both of you. You fired me fine, but this is still my property. This is my home. I have the deed somewhere. I pay the bills. You can't just come in here and dictate terms to me in my own living room. I looked at him, and for a moment I almost felt pity. It was the pity one feels for a delusional child who believes they are a superhero right before they jump off the couch and hit the floor. He really believed it. He really believed that his $80,000 salary, which he had inflated to millions in his own mind, had paid for the marble floors beneath his feet and the crystal chandelier above his head. He had lived the lie for so long that it had calcified into his reality. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned to Mr. Harrington, who was standing by the fireplace looking at the Stanton family with the cold, dispassionate gaze of a man watching a business merger collapse. "Mr. Harrington, the file, please," I said, extending my hand. Harrington opened his leather briefcase. It was a sound that echoed in the silent dining room, a sharp click that sounded like a gun being cocked. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal paper and handed it to me. I weighed it in my hand. It wasn't just paper, it was the deed. It was the trust agreement. It was the receipt for their entire existence. "You don't own this house, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a gravelly rumble that vibrated through the room. "You never did. You are a tenant, a guest. And you have overstayed your welcome by exactly 5 years. What are you talking about?" Chloe shrieked, stepping out from behind her husband, her face pale and streaked with mascara. "We signed papers. We went to the closing. I remember the closing, Dad. We signed a mountain of paperwork. You signed an occupancy agreement," I corrected her, walking slowly around the table, my old boots thudding softly on the hardwood I had paid to install. "You signed a lease agreement with the Freeman Family Trust. You didn't read it, did you? You were too busy looking at the pool. You were too busy picking out curtains. You just saw the keys and you signed where the lawyer told you to sign." I threw the document onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Derek. "Read it," I commanded. "Read the header." Derek looked down. His eyes scanned the page, and I saw the blood drain from his face until he looked like a wax figure. "Property of the Freeman Family Trust," he whispered, reading the bold letters. "Managed by Freeman Capital." "Turn to page 4, I said. Clause 17. The conduct clause." Derek's hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the page. The paper rattled like dry leaves in a windstorm. He found the paragraph. He read it silently, his lips moving. "Read it out loud," I said. He swallowed hard. Occupancy is contingent upon the moral standing and ethical conduct of the tenants. Any act of fraud, theft, or gross disrespect toward the trust's benefactors will result in immediate termination of the lease and forfeiture of all residency rights. Gross disrespect toward the benefactors, I repeated. I stepped closer to him. I leaned in until I could smell the fear on him, until I could see the red veins in his eyes. "I am the benefactor, Derek," I whispered. "I am the trust. And when you slammed the door in my face tonight, when you kicked my pie into the snow, when you told me I was trash, you violated Clause 17. Chloe let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. "No, Dad, you can't. This is our home. We have lived here for 5 years. My clothes are here. My life is here. Your life is a loan," I said, turning to her. "And the loan has been called in." I pulled my phone from the pocket of my old wool coat. I pressed a single button. Speed dial 1. "Send them in," I said into the phone. I didn't even have to wait 10 seconds. The front door, which Derek had slammed in my face an hour ago, burst open. But it wasn't guests arriving. It was a team of 6 men wearing black tactical uniforms. They weren't police. They were private security. High-end. Expensive. The kind of men who guarded vaults and escorted diplomats. They filed into the foyer, their boots heavy and authoritative, filling the space with an air of absolute inevitable force. "Who are they?" Derek screamed, backing away until he hit the sideboard, causing the china to rattle. "Who are these people?" "This is the eviction team," I said, checking my watch. "It is 9:15. You have until 10:15. 1 hour. 1 hour for what?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "To get out," I said. "To take your personal effects and leave my property. But we have furniture," Chloe cried. "We have beds. We have the piano." "The piano belongs to the house," I said. "The furniture was purchased with the interior design stipend provided by the trust. It stays. The art stays. The appliances stay." I looked at Derek. "Anything you bought with your own money, your real money, you can take," I said. "Anything you bought with the company credit card, anything you bought with funds you embezzled stays here. It is recovery of stolen assets." "That leaves us with nothing," Derek shouted. "We have nothing." "Then you leave with nothing," I said, my voice hard as stone. "You leave the way I arrived tonight, in the cold." "Start the clock," I said to the lead security officer. The officer nodded. He looked at his team. "Let's go," he said. "Clear the rooms. Watch them. Make sure they don't damage the assets." Chaos erupted. It was a beautiful, terrible symphony of consequences. Chloe ran for the stairs, her heels clicking frantically on the steps, screaming about her shoes, her bags, her dresses. 2 security guards followed her, not to help her pack but to supervise, to make sure she didn't stuff the silver into her bra, to make sure she didn't vandalize the walls in a fit of spite. Derek stood in the dining room, paralyzed. He looked at me, then at Harrington, then at the guards. He realized there was no negotiation. There was no talking his way out of this. "You are ruining me," he whispered. "You ruined yourself," I said. "I am just sweeping up the debris." He turned and ran toward the living room. I followed him at a distance, walking slowly, Harrington at my side. I watched as Derek frantically looked around the room, trying to find something, anything of value that he could claim. His eyes landed on the television. It was an 85-inch flat screen mounted above the fireplace, a massive, sleek piece of technology that dominated the room. Derek ran to it. He grabbed the sides of the screen, trying to wrench it off the wall mount. "This is mine," he grunted, pulling at the bracket. "I bought this. I used my bonus check." "Security," I said calmly. One of the guards, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, stepped between Derek and the television. He put a hand on Derek's chest and pushed him back. Not gently. "Don't touch the hardware, sir," the guard said, his voice flat. "It is mine," Derek screamed, spitting with rage. "I have the receipt." "The receipt shows it was purchased from Best Buy on November 12th, Harrington said, consulting his tablet. "Paid for with a Stanton Industries corporate card. Project code 404, office supplies." Harrington looked up from the screen. "An 85-inch TV is not office supplies," Derek Harrington said. "That is company property, and since you are no longer an employee, you are attempting to steal corporate assets. Again." Derek let go of the TV. He looked at his hands. He looked around the room. The stereo system. Company card. The leather recliner. Company card. The laptop sitting on the coffee table. Company property. He owned nothing. He was a man made of borrowed parts, and when the owner came to collect, he disappeared. Upstairs I could hear Chloe screaming. It was the sound of a woman watching her identity be stuffed into garbage bags. "Not the Louis Vuitton," she shrieked, her voice carrying down the stairwell. "Not the Prada. Those are mine." "Only if you can prove purchase with personal funds," a guard's voice replied, calm and robotic. I walked to the foot of the stairs. I watched as Chloe came dragging a black heavy-duty trash bag down the steps. She was crying, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face, making her look like a tragic clown. She was wearing her expensive evening gown, but she was barefoot, holding her heels in one hand and the trash bag in the other. "Dad, please," she sobbed, stopping on the landing. "Please don't do this. Where are we supposed to go? It is snowing. It is Thanksgiving." I looked at her. I saw the daughter I had raised. I saw the entitlement that I had accidentally watered and fed until it choked out her gratitude. "There is a Motel 6 on the highway," I said. "I believe they have vacancies. It is not the Ritz, Chloe, but it has a roof, which is more than you offered me when you told me to sit in the garage." She flinched as if I had struck her. She hauled the bag over her shoulder and continued down the stairs. She walked past me, her head low, defeated. She walked to the front door where a guard was holding it open. The cold wind blew in, carrying snowflakes into the warm foyer. She stepped out into the night. Derek was next. He came out of the living room carrying a cardboard box. Inside were a few pairs of socks, some underwear, a toothbrush, and a framed photo of himself playing golf. That was it. That was the sum total of his life that hadn't been stolen. He stopped in front of me. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. "I will get you for this," he muttered. "I will sue you. I will tell everyone. Tell them I said. Tell them you stole from your father-in-law. Tell them you tried to con your CEO. Tell them you locked an old man in a cold garage on Thanksgiving. Tell the world, Derek. See whose side they take." He didn't say another word. He walked out the door into the snow. I turned to the lead security guard. "Change the locks," I said. "Now, sir?" the guard asked. "Right now," I said. "I want the tumblers drilled out. I want new deadbolts installed before I leave tonight. And post a guard at the gate. If they come back, if they even put a wheel on the driveway, call the police and press charges for trespassing." "Yes, sir." The guard pulled a drill from his belt. The sound of the drill biting into the metal of the lock was loud and harsh, screeching through the empty house. It was the sound of finality. It was the sound of a chapter closing. I walked back into the dining room. The food was still on the table, cold and untouched. The wine was still in the decanter, breathing. Harrington was standing by the window, watching the taillights of Derek's car fade into the darkness of the snowy street. "They are gone," he said. "Yes," I said. "They are gone." I sat down at the table. I was tired. My bones ached. But my mind was clear. Harrington sat down across from me. He reached for the bottle of wine, the Chateau Margaux he had brought. He poured a glass for me and a glass for himself. He raised his glass. To gratitude, he said softly. I looked at the deep red liquid. I thought about the pie on the porch. I thought about the cold garage. And then I looked at the man sitting across from me, a man who had shown me more respect in 5 minutes than my family had in 5 years. To gratitude, I said. We drank. The wine was excellent. It tasted of earth and time and hard lessons. And as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the big empty house, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I belonged. I was at the head of the table. The snow had started to fall in heavy, wet flakes, the kind that soak through wool and settle into your bones. Derek and Chloe stood on the curb outside their former home, surrounded by 4 black garbage bags and a cardboard box. The security team had locked the front door behind them, the heavy thud echoing in the silent suburban street. The house lights were still on, casting a warm, inviting glow onto the snow, a cruel reminder of the comfort they had just been evicted from. I watched them from the warmth of the limousine parked down the street. Harrington sat beside me, his face grim. "Are you sure you want to watch this, sir?" he asked. "I need to see it," I said. "I need to see if they break." Derek was pacing back and forth in the slush, his expensive Italian loafers already ruined. He was still wearing his suit, but without a coat, he was shivering violently. He pulled out his phone, his fingers clumsy with cold. "I am calling a car," he shouted over the wind. "We are going to the Ritz. We will sort this out in the morning." He tapped the screen. I saw him frown. He tapped again, harder this time. "What is wrong?" Chloe asked, huddled in her thin evening gown, her arms wrapped around herself. Her teeth were chattering so loud I could almost hear them from here. "The app," Derek muttered. "It says payment declined. Update payment method." "Use the other card," Chloe said. "The Visa." "I tried the Visa," Derek snapped. "I tried the Amex. I tried everything. They are all dead. He killed them all." "He killed them," Chloe shrieked. "How can he kill my cards? They are in my name." "They are supplementary cards, you idiot," Derek yelled, turning on her. "They are attached to his account. He cut us off. We are stranded." Just then, a tow truck rumbled down the street. It was a massive flatbed with yellow flashing lights that cut through the darkness. It pulled up to the driveway where Derek's Porsche was parked. The driver jumped out, hooking chains to the axle with efficient speed. "Hey!" Derek screamed, running toward the truck. "Hey, get away from my car! That is my car!" The driver ignored him. He winched the Porsche up onto the bed. The alarm blared for a few seconds before being silenced. "Stop!" Derek yelled, grabbing the driver's arm. "I am the director of sales. You can't take this." The driver shook him off easily. "Repo order from Stanton Industries," the driver grunted. "Take it up with corporate." He got in the truck and drove away, taking the last symbol of Derek's success with him. Derek stood in the middle of the road, watching his car disappear into the snow. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He turned back to Chloe. His face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before. It wasn't the anger of a man who had lost his job. It was the anger of a man who had been exposed. "This is your fault," he hissed, stalking toward her. "My fault," Chloe gasped, backing away until she hit the pile of garbage bags. "How is this my fault? You are the one who stole—" "You told me he was nothing," Derek screamed, his voice cracking. "You told me he was a senile old fool. You said, 'Don't worry about Dad, he doesn't know what day it is.' You lied to me, Chloe. You set me up." "I didn't know," Chloe cried. "I thought he was poor. I thought he was just a bus driver." "You should have known," Derek roared. "He is your father." "How could you not know your own father was a tycoon?" "You are stupid, Chloe. You are a stupid, vain, useless woman." "Don't call me that," she yelled. "You are the thief. You are the one who embezzled money to buy a mistress, a bracelet." Derek stopped. The vein in his forehead pulsed. "I needed her," he said, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "I needed someone who looked at me with respect, not like you. You only looked at me when I bought you something. You are a gold digger, Chloe, and now the gold is gone." "I am your wife," she screamed. "You are a liability," he shouted, and then he hit her. It wasn't a punch. It was a slap, sharp and stinging. The sound cracked through the cold air. Chloe stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek. She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "You hit me," she whispered. "I should have done it years ago," Derek spat. "Maybe then you would have shut up about the country club." I reached for the door handle. I was going to get out. I was going to stop this. But Harrington put a hand on my arm. "Wait," he said. "Look." Chloe didn't cower. She didn't cry. She straightened up. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had chosen over me. "You are a coward," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You are a weak, pathetic little man. My father was right. You are nothing." Derek raised his hand again, but this time a police cruiser turned the corner, its lights flashing. They weren't coming for the domestic dispute. They were coming for the embezzlement. Derek froze. He looked at the police car. He looked at Chloe. He looked at the snow. He ran. He dropped his bag and ran down the street, slipping on the ice, scrambling away into the darkness like a rat. Chloe stood there alone. The snow fell on her bare shoulders. She looked at the house. She looked at the spot where I had stood earlier. She sank down onto one of the garbage bags and put her head in her hands. I signaled the driver. "Let's go," I said. "We are leaving her," Harrington asked. "She needs to feel the cold," I said. "She needs to know what it is like to be truly alone. Only then will she understand what she threw away." We drove past her. She didn't look up. She was just a dark shape in the snow, a monument to regret. I leaned back in the seat. My heart hurt, but my resolve was iron. The lesson had begun. The morning sun glinted off the steel and glass spire of the Freeman Capital headquarters, a 40-story monolith that dominated the city skyline. It was the kind of building that scraped the clouds, the kind of building that whispered power to anyone who stood in its shadow. Up on the top floor in the boardroom that floated above the city like a god's observation deck, I sat at the head of a table made from a single slab of black walnut. I was not wearing the frayed wool coat today. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit cut from Italian fabric, my cufflinks glinting with understated gold, my posture rigid and commanding. Around the table sat 5 of the most powerful men in the hemisphere. There was the CEO of a global shipping conglomerate, a tech mogul from Silicon Valley, and a venture capitalist from Tokyo. We were discussing the acquisition of a lithium mine in Nevada, a deal worth $4 billion. The air in the room was rarefied, thin, and expensive. It smelled of espresso and ink and the ozone scent of massive amounts of money moving through the ether. I was in my element. This was the Augustus Freeman. The world feared the man I had hidden from my family for decades to protect them from their own greed. I was mid-sentence explaining the risk assessment of the geological survey when the heavy double doors at the far end of the reception suite shuttered. Through the soundproof glass walls of the boardroom, I saw a commotion at the front desk. My executive assistant, Sarah, a woman who could stop a tank with a raised eyebrow, was standing up, her hand held out in a stop gesture. But the intruder was not stopping. It was Chloe. She looked nothing like the princess who had presided over the Thanksgiving dinner the night before. Her hair was a tangled mess, pulled back in a frantic knot. She was wearing a trench coat over what looked like sweatpants, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing skin that was blotchy and swollen from a night of crying. She looked desperate. She looked manic. She looked like a woman who had woken up in a pile of ash and was looking for a diamond she had dropped. She pushed past Sarah. She slammed her hands against the glass wall of the conference room, her palms leaving greasy smears on the pristine surface. She saw me. Her eyes went wide. Her jaw dropped. She stopped screaming at the receptionist and just stared. She stared at the view of the city behind me. She stared at the billionaire sitting at my table. And then she stared at me, the father she had sent to the garage, sitting at the head of the table, commanding the attention of titans. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I simply raised a single finger, indicating to my guests that I needed a moment. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and level. "It appears we have a security breach." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked slowly toward the glass door. Chloe was pounding on it now, mouthing the word "Dad" over and over again. I could see the panic in her eyes, the dawning realization of just how colossal her mistake had been. She wasn't just looking at a rich man. She was looking at the emperor of the world she wanted so desperately to join, and realizing she had barred the gates to her own castle. I opened the door. I stepped out into the reception area, closing the glass door behind me to seal off the boardroom. The silence of the hallway was instantly replaced by the sound of my daughter sobbing. "Dad," she cried, lunging toward me. "Oh my God, Dad, it is true. It is all true. You own this. You own everything." She tried to grab my lapels to bury her face in my chest the way she used to when she was 5 years old and had a nightmare, but she was not 5, and this was not a nightmare she could wake up from. This was a reality she had crafted with her own cruelty. I stepped back. I raised my hand. "Stop," I said. The word was not loud, but it hit her like a physical blow. She froze her hands, hovering in the air between us. "Dad, please," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "We have nowhere to go. We slept in a motel last night, a cheap motel, Dad, with bugs. Derek is falling apart. He is crying. He is scared. We have no money. The accounts are frozen. The cards are dead. You have to help us." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband kick my pie into the snow. I looked at the woman who had told me I didn't belong in her house because I wasn't important enough. "You are disrupting my meeting," I said, my voice as cold as the winter wind outside. "These men traveled from Tokyo and London. Their time is worth $1,000 a minute. I don't care about them," she screamed, her hysteria rising. "I am your daughter. I am your flesh and blood. Does that mean nothing to you?" "It meant everything to me," I said quietly. "It meant so much that I hid my wealth so you would grow up normal. It meant so much that I paid off your husband's gambling debts so you wouldn't have a broken heart. It meant so much that I swallowed my pride and walked into your house through the garage just to bring you a pie." I leaned in closer, my face hard as stone. "But yesterday you told me I didn't belong. You told me I was an embarrassment. You told me to wait in the cold until the important people were gone. I was wrong," she wailed, grabbing at her hair. "I was stupid. I see that now." "You don't see anything, Chloe," I said. "You only see the money. You are here because you saw the limousine. You are here because you saw the suit. If I were still wearing that old coat, if I were still just Gus the retiree, you would have left me in the snow." "No," she lied, but her eyes shifted. "Yes," I said. "You are not here for a father. You are here for an ATM. And this machine is out of order." "Dad, please," she begged, falling to her knees on the plush carpet of the reception area. "Just a loan. Just enough to get an apartment. Just enough to hire a lawyer for Derek. He is going to jail, Dad. They are talking about embezzlement. He is a thief," I said. "And thieves go to jail. That is how the world works. But he is my husband. And I was your father," I said. Past tense. She looked up at me, shocked by the grammar. I looked at Sarah, my assistant, who was standing by the security desk, her hand hovering over the panic button. "Sarah," I asked, without looking away from Chloe, "does this woman have an appointment?" Sarah checked the empty logbook on her desk. "No, Mr. Freeman, she does not." I looked down at Chloe. "You heard her," I said. "This is a place of business. We only see important people here, people with appointments, people with integrity." "Dad, stop it," she cried, scrambling to get up. "You are hurting me. You hurt yourself," I said. "You cut the cord, Chloe. You severed the tie. You chose the status over the soul. Now you have neither." I turned my back on her. I reached for the handle of the boardroom door. "Dad, wait!" she screamed, reaching out. "I am your daughter. I am Chloe." I stopped. I looked back over my shoulder. My daughter was a kind girl, I said, my voice breaking for just a fraction of a second before hardening again. My daughter valued family. My daughter would never have let her husband kick an old man out into the snow. I looked her dead in the eye. "I don't know who you are," I said, "but I don't have a daughter named Traitor." I opened the door and stepped back into the boardroom. I closed it firmly behind me. The sound of the latch clicking shut was final. Through the glass, I saw Chloe scream. I saw her throw herself against the door, but the soundproof glass swallowed her noise. She looked like a fish gasping in an aquarium, silent and pathetic. 2 large security guards appeared in the hallway. They were gentle but firm. They took her by the arms. She struggled, she kicked, she pointed at me. But they lifted her up and marched her toward the elevators. I watched her go. I watched my only child being dragged out of my building like a trespasser. The room was silent. The billionaires were staring at me. They had seen everything. They knew power when they saw it, and they knew the cost of it. I walked back to the head of the table. I adjusted my cuffs. I sat down. I picked up the geological survey. Now, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was bleeding in my chest. Where were we? The lithium deposits in Sector 4. I went back to work. I buried my grief under numbers and projections. I buried the father and let the chairman take over, because the father had nothing left to give. But the chairman had a war to finish, and the first battle had just been won. I sat back in the leather chair of the boardroom and watched the heavy oak doors close, sealing my daughter's screams in the hallway. The silence returned to the room, but the tension remained. The billionaires around the table were looking at me not with judgment, but with a quiet, terrified respect. They understood the cost of empire. They understood that sometimes you have to amputate a limb to save the body. I picked up the geological survey of the lithium mine, but the numbers blurred before my eyes. I wasn't thinking about mineral density. I was thinking about the final missile I had just launched. Sarah, my assistant, walked into the room. She held a sleek black tablet against her chest. She looked at me and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was done. The courier was already downstairs. I had kicked Chloe out of the building, but I knew she wouldn't leave the sidewalk immediately. She would stand there crying, waiting for a miracle, waiting for Derek to call, waiting for the world to stop spinning out of control. She was desperate, and desperate people linger at the scene of their rejection. Down on the street, the wind was whipping through the concrete canyons of the financial district. Chloe stood shivering by the revolving doors, hugging her trench coat tight around her body. She had been stripped of her dignity, her home, and her family. She thought she had hit rock bottom. She thought the worst thing that could happen was being rejected by her rich father. She was wrong. A bike messenger pulled up to the curb. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was dressed in black. He scanned the sidewalk looking for the woman described in his order. He spotted Chloe. He walked up to her and handed her a thick manila envelope. It wasn't sealed with tape. It was tied with a red string, the kind used for legal evidence. Chloe took it. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. She probably thought it was a check. She probably thought I had changed my mind, that my fatherly guilt had kicked in and I was sending her a lifeline. A few $1,000s to get a hotel room, a ticket to restart. She tore open the string. She reached inside. It wasn't money. It was photos. I watched the security feed from the lobby camera, which had an angle on the street. I zoomed in. I needed to see her face. I needed to see the moment the last chain binding her to that monster Derek was broken. She pulled out the first photograph. It was taken 3 weeks ago. It showed Derek sitting at a table in a dimly lit French bistro. He wasn't alone. He was holding the hand of a woman who was definitely not Chloe. The woman was young, maybe 23, with blonde hair and a smile that looked like it cost a fortune. Derek was laughing, leaning in close, looking at her the way he used to look at money. Chloe froze. She stared at the image as if it were written in a foreign language. Her brain refused to process it. Derek was stressed, she told herself. Derek was working late. Derek was fighting for their future. She pulled out the second photo. This one was clearer. It was Derek and the woman standing on the balcony of a high-rise apartment. His arms were wrapped around her waist. He was kissing her neck. The timestamp in the corner of the photo showed it was taken on the same night Chloe had called me crying, saying Derek was at the office trying to fix the accounting errors. She flipped through the rest. Derek buying jewelry, Derek entering a hotel, Derek looking happy, relaxed, and rich. Then she found the documents. I had compiled a forensic accounting of his theft. I didn't just show that he stole from the company. I showed where the money went. Chloe stood there on the cold pavement, the wind tearing at the papers in her hand. She read the bank transfer receipt. Date October 14th. Amount $500,000. Recipient Skyline Realty Group. Memo Unit 4B. Tiffany Miller. $500,000. The exact amount he had embezzled from the operational fund. He hadn't stolen it to cover bad investments. He hadn't stolen it to save their house from foreclosure. He hadn't stolen it to maintain their lifestyle. He had stolen it to buy an apartment for his mistress. Chloe made a sound that the security camera couldn't pick up, but I felt it in my bones. It was a guttural, animalistic noise of pure devastation. She dropped the envelope. The papers scattered on the wet concrete. She fell to her knees, scrambling to pick them up, reading them again and again, hoping the words would change. Tiffany Miller, luxury condo, paid in full. She looked at the date again. October 14th. She remembered that day. It was her anniversary. Derek had come home late, claiming the board meeting ran over. He had brought her a cheap bouquet of supermarket flowers and told her things were tight, that he couldn't afford a gift this year. He had told her they needed to make sacrifices. She had sacrificed. She had cut coupons. She had sold her designer bags. She had humiliated her own father at Thanksgiving dinner because Derek told her they needed to impress the CEO to survive. And all the while he had a $500,000 apartment across town with a 23-year-old girl named Tiffany living in it on his dime. My dime. She sat on the sidewalk, oblivious to the pedestrians stepping around her. The reality crashed down on her with the force of a collapsing building. It wasn't just greed, it was hate. Derek didn't just love money, he despised her. He had used her as a shield, he had used her father as a bank. And while she was defending him, while she was throwing her own flesh and blood into the snow to protect his fragile ego, he was laughing at her in the arms of another woman. She looked at the photo of Derek kissing Tiffany. She saw the watch on his wrist. It was the gold Rolex he told her he had sold to pay the electric bill. He hadn't sold it. He was wearing it for her. Chloe screamed. It was a scream that stopped traffic, a scream of betrayal so deep it tore her throat. She pounded her fists against the pavement. She ripped the photo in half. Then she ripped it again. She realized then the magnitude of her sin. She had traded a father who would have died for her for a husband who was robbing her blind. She had looked at me standing in the cold with a sweet potato pie made with her mother's recipe, and she had felt shame. She had looked at Derek, a thief and a liar, and she had felt pride. She was the fool, the mark, the victim of a long con that she had helped execute. She looked up at the building. She looked at the 42nd floor where she knew I was sitting. I could see her face on the monitor. The makeup was gone. The pretense was gone. There was only raw agony. She didn't try to come back in. She didn't try to beg. She knew she had lost the right to ask for anything. She stood up slowly. She gathered the damp papers, the evidence of her ruined life, and stuffed them into her pocket. She didn't call Derek. She knew he wouldn't answer. He was probably with Tiffany right now, hiding in the apartment bought with stolen funds, thinking he was safe. Chloe turned and started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked away from the building, away from the husband who betrayed her, away from the father she betrayed. I turned off the monitor. The room was quiet. My heart felt heavy like a stone in my chest. It gave me no pleasure to break her heart. But a bone that heals crooked has to be rebroken to heal straight. She needed to know the truth. She needed to know that the man she sacrificed her soul for was nothing but smoke and mirrors. I looked at the billionaires around the table. They were waiting. They had seen the distraction. They had seen the pain on my face, but they respected the silence. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice raspy but firm. I apologize for the interruption. "Family business." The tech mogul from Silicon Valley nodded. "Sometimes the hardest negotiations are the ones at home, Gus." "You have no idea," I said. I picked up the stylus. I pointed at the map on the screen. "The lithium deposits," I said, forcing my mind back to business. "The yield projections in Sector 4 are underestimated. If we deploy the new extraction tech, we can double the output in 6 months." I continued the meeting. I talked about margins and logistics. I talked about supply chains and geopolitical risk. I was the chairman. I was the rock. But inside, I was mourning. I was mourning the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me to chase away the monsters under her bed. I had chased away the monster today. But I had to burn down the house to do it. Chloe was alone now. Truly alone. She had no husband, no father, no money. She was walking the streets of a cold city with nothing but the truth in her pocket. It was a harsh gift. But it was the only one that could save her. She had to hit the bottom. She had to feel the concrete, because only when you are on the ground can you see which way is up. I finished the meeting an hour later. The deal was signed. $4 billion. Another victory for Freeman Capital. Another headline for the business journals. But as I walked to the window and looked down at the city lights blinking in the twilight, I felt no triumph. I took out my phone. I dialed a number. Not Chloe's, not Derek's, not... I called the head of my private security detail. "Locate her," I said. "Sir, my daughter," I said. "She is on foot. Find her. Don't approach her. Don't help her. Just watch her." Make sure she doesn't do anything stupid. Make sure she is safe." "Understood, sir. We are on it." I hung up. It was a thin lifeline, a thread, but it was still there. She had to walk through the fire alone. But I would be watching from the shadows, making sure she didn't burn to ash. I turned off the lights in the boardroom. The darkness was comforting. Tomorrow Derek would face the music. Tomorrow the police would knock on Tiffany Miller's door. Tomorrow the world would know that Derek Stanton was a fraud. But tonight the only thing that mattered was that Chloe finally knew the truth. And the truth, as bitter as it was the first step home. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel buzzed with the frantic dying rhythm of a trapped insect flickering pink and gray against the rain-slicked pavement of the parking lot. Inside room 12, Derek Stanton huddled under a thin, scratchy blanket that smelled of industrial bleach and other people's cigarettes. He was watching the door. He had been watching the door for 48 hours. The man who had once demanded only the finest Egyptian cotton sheets and wines that cost more than a car payment was now praying that the vending machine outside would accept his last wrinkled dollar bill. He was waiting for Chloe to call. He was waiting for me to call. He was waiting for the world to realize that this was all just a terrible administrative error and return him to his corner office. But the call that came was not on the phone. It was a battering ram against the cheap particle board of the motel room door. The sound was explosive, shattering the stagnant air of the room. Wood splintered. The lock gave way with a pathetic crunch. Before Derek could even scramble off the bed, the room was filled with men in windbreakers emblazoned with federal badges. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of predators who had cornered their prey. There were no polite knocks. There were no requests for identification. There was only the blinding beam of tactical flashlights and the shouting of orders that left no room for negotiation. "Freeze! Federal agents! Show me your hands!" Derek shrieked a high-pitched sound that belonged to a child, not a corporate executive. He threw his hands up, pressing his back against the peeling wallpaper, his eyes wide and white in the harsh light. He was wearing the same suit he had fled the house in, but it was ruined, now stained with sweat and the grime of 2 days on the run. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a petty thief who had been playing dress-up in a man's world. "Get on the ground, now." They dragged him off the bed. His knees hit the dirty carpet hard. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs bite into his wrists, the same wrists that used to wear a stolen Rolex. "Wait," he stammered. His face pressed into the rug. "You have the wrong person. I am a vice president. I am Derek Stanton. Call my father-in-law. Call Augustus Freeman. He will clear this up. He is a billionaire." The lead agent, a man with a face carved from granite, hauled Derek to his feet. "We know who your father-in-law is, Mr. Stanton," the agent said, his voice dripping with professional disdain. "He is the one who gave us your location, and he is the one who gave us the ledger." Derek went limp. The fight drained out of him instantly. He realized in that moment that I hadn't just cut him off. I had hunted him down. I had tracked the usage of the burner phone he bought. I had tracked the IP address he used to check his empty offshore accounts. I had watched him run, and I had waited until he had nowhere left to go before I signaled the hounds. They marched him out of the motel room past the gawking residents who stood in their doorways in undershirts and bathrobes. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the wet asphalt in chaotic strokes of red and blue. Derek looked around, hoping for a camera crew, hoping for an audience so he could play the victim one last time. But there was no press. There was only the cold indifference of the law. They shoved him into the back of an unmarked sedan. As the door slammed shut, sealing him in a cage of safety glass and metal, he started to cry. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a man who realized the game was truly over. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and mounting evidence. I did not rest. I sat in my office at Freeman Capital, surrounded by a team of forensic accountants who were sharper than any knife. We dissected Derek's life. We peeled back the layers of his deception like the skin of an onion. We found everything. We found the shell companies he had set up to siphon consulting fees. We found the altered invoices where he had inflated vendor costs by 40% and pocketed the difference. We found the forged signatures on the loan documents for the lake house. We found the wire transfers to the jewelers where he bought diamonds for his mistress Tiffany using the company's operational fund. We found the emails where he bragged to his fraternity brothers about how easy it was to fool the old man. I read every single one. Each document was a nail in the coffin I was building for him. He called me a fool in those emails. He called me a cash cow. He joked about how he was waiting for me to die so he could liquidate the trust. I printed them all. I bound them in heavy black folders, and I hand-delivered them to the district attorney. I want the maximum, I told the prosecutor, a woman who had known me for years and knew that I was not a man who sought vengeance lightly. Augustus, these are serious charges, she had said, looking through the file. Grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, aggravated white-collar crime. We are looking at a decade. Good, I said. He stole 5 years of my life pretending to be a son. I will take 10 of his in return. The trial was swift. It wasn't the media circus Derek had hoped for. It was a procedural dismantling of a criminal enterprise. The courtroom was sterile, smelling of floor wax and old wood. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, monotone note of judgment. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table. I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I wore when I acquired companies. I held my cane in my hands, my knuckles resting on the gold lion's head handle. I sat perfectly still. I was the statue of justice. Derek was brought in. He had lost weight. The prison jumpsuit hung off his frame, making him look like a boy wearing his father's clothes. His hair was shaved off, revealing the shape of a skull that seemed too fragile to hold so much arrogance. He scanned the room desperately. He looked for Chloe, but she wasn't there. She had sent a letter through her lawyer stating she would testify against him if needed, but she refused to look at his face. He looked for his parents, but the St. Clairs were gone, consumed by their own poverty and shame. Then he saw me. His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Derek the manipulator. He straightened his spine. He tried to summon a smile, a look of familial connection. He mouthed the word, Dad. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. I looked at him as if he were a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be redacted. The proceedings began. The prosecutor laid out the case with surgical precision. She showed the bank records. She showed the forged documents. She played the audio recording from the security system in my house, the one where he called me a beggar and laughed about putting me in the garage. The courtroom listened in silence. The jurors looked at Derek with disgust. He shrank in his seat, trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear. When it was time for the defense, Derek's court-appointed lawyer stood up. He looked tired. He knew he had a losing hand. He didn't try to argue the facts. He tried to argue for mercy. Your Honor, he said, his voice lacking conviction. My client is a first-time offender. He was under tremendous financial pressure. He made mistakes, yes, but he was trying to provide for his family. He is a young man with a bright future who lost his way. We ask for leniency. We ask for probation and a restitution plan. Restitution. As if he could ever pay back the trust he had shattered. The judge, a stern man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, looked over his spectacles at Derek. Mr. Stanton, do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Derek stood up. He was shaking. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table to steady himself. He didn't look at the judge. He turned around. He looked directly at me. Dad, he said, his voice cracking loud enough for the whole room to hear. Dad, please. I know you are angry. I know I messed up, but I am family. I am Chloe's husband. I am the son you never had. Don't let them do this to me. Tell them we can work this out. I will work for free. I will pay you back every cent. Just don't let me go to prison. I can't survive in there, Dad. Please. He was crying now, ugly, snotty tears running down his face. He held his hands out toward me, palms up, begging. I stood up. The room went silent. Everyone watched me. The billionaire, the victim, the father. I looked at Derek. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about the pie on the porch. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he thought I was poor. You are not my son, I said, my voice clear and cold, carrying to the back of the room. You never were. You were a parasite, and I am the cure. I turned my back on him. I sat down. Derek let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. The bailiff stepped forward, putting a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to sit. The judge banged his gavel. Derek Stanton, having been found guilty on all counts and showing a profound lack of remorse beyond self-preservation, I sentence you to 5 years in a federal correctional facility. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $215,000. You are remanded into custody immediately." 5 years, Derek screamed as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. 5 years. "Dad, you can't let this happen." They dragged him away. He was kicking and screaming, fighting against the inevitable. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes filled with a hatred that would burn for a lifetime. But I didn't care. His hate was powerless. It was the hate of a ghost. The door to the holding cell slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The courtroom began to clear. The prosecutor walked over to me, shaking my hand. "It is done, Mr. Freeman," she said. "Justice is served." "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the courthouse. The winter air was crisp and clean. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was a brilliant, hard blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I felt lighter. The weight of the secret, the weight of the deception, the weight of carrying a man who refused to walk was gone. I walked down the steps of the courthouse alone. My car was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door. "Where to, sir?" he asked. "Take me to the office," I said. "I have a company to run." I got in. I didn't look back at the building where my son-in-law would spend the next 5 years of his life. I looked forward. I looked at the city I had helped build. I had cleaned house. I had taken out the trash. Now it was time to see if anything worth saving could be found in the wreckage. I thought of Chloe. I wondered if she was watching the news. I wondered if she finally understood the cost of a free lunch. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engine soothe me. 5 years. It was a good start. The fall from the penthouse to the pavement is a long one, but the landing is what breaks you. Chloe found herself living in a reality she had only ever seen in the movies she used to mock. Her assets were frozen. Her name was mud in the city, and the only thing she owned was a suitcase full of clothes she could no longer afford to dry clean. She was sleeping on a futon in a basement studio apartment that smelled of damp concrete and other people's cooking. It was a poetic justice that she was now living in a basement just like the one she tried to force me into, but she was too exhausted to appreciate the irony. She needed money, not for jewelry or vacations, but for bread, for rent, for survival. She applied to boutiques, they laughed at her. She applied to galleries, they slammed the door. Her resume was a list of social climbing achievements that meant nothing in the real world. Finally, desperate and hungry, she walked into a diner on the edge of the industrial district. It was called the Rusty Spoon. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the floors were sticky, and the customers were tired. She got the job not because of her charm, but because the manager, a man named Rick, who had a face like a clenched fist, needed a body to fill a shift. He looked at her manicured hands, which were already starting to chip, and he sneered. "You start now," Rick barked, tossing a stained apron at her. $6 an hour plus tips. And if you break a plate, it comes out of your pay. Don't expect special treatment, princess. Chloe put on the apron. It smelled of old grease and onions. She tied it over her designer jeans, which were the last remnant of her old life. She walked out onto the floor. Her first shift was a nightmare of physical labor she had never known. She ran back and forth between the kitchen and the tables, carrying heavy trays that made her arms tremble. Her feet, accustomed to Italian leather soles, screamed in protest inside the cheap sneakers she had bought at a discount store. The noise was deafening. The clatter of silverware, the shouting of the cooks, the demanding voices of the customers. "Hey you," the customer at table 4 shouted, a man in a dirty work shirt. "Where is my coffee? I asked for it 10 minutes ago." "I am sorry," Chloe stammered, her voice thin and weak. "The pot is brewing." "I don't care about the pot," the man snapped. "I have a shift to get to. Move your ass." Chloe flinched. She looked at the man. He looked at her with total disdain. He didn't see a person. He saw a servant. He saw a machine that was malfunctioning. She hurried to the coffee station, her hands shaking. She poured the cup, spilling a little on her thumb. The hot liquid burned, but she didn't cry out. She wiped it on her apron and ran back to the table. "Here," she said, placing it down. The man didn't say thank you. He just grunted and turned back to his newspaper. She walked away, feeling a lump form in her throat. She remembered how she used to snap her fingers at waiters. She remembered how she used to send back wine if it wasn't the perfect temperature. She remembered how she had treated me at the wedding. Is this how I made people feel, she thought? Is this how I made my father feel? The lunch rush hit like a tidal wave. Chloe was spinning, running, sweating. Her hair came loose from its bun, hanging in damp strands around her face. She was clearing a table when Rick, the manager, grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" he hissed. That table sat there dirty for 5 minutes. Do you think we are running a charity here? Turn the tables faster. I am trying, she whispered. Try harder, he said, pushing her toward the kitchen. You are useless. I don't know why I hired you. You move like you are walking through molasses. She went into the kitchen. The heat was suffocating. The cook, a large man with tattoos on his neck, slammed a plate of meatloaf onto the pass. Order up, he yelled. Pick it up before it gets cold. She grabbed the plate. It was hot. It burned her fingers. She walked back out into the dining room. She was approaching table 7. A family was sitting there. A father, a mother, and 2 young children. They looked happy. They looked normal. The father was laughing at something the child said. Chloe felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it almost doubled her over. She had destroyed her own family. She had thrown away the only father who ever loved her for a husband who was now a convicted felon. She approached the table. Here's the meatloaf, she said, trying to smile. The mother looked at her. She looked at Chloe's messy hair, her stained apron, her shaking hands. The woman's nose wrinkled. Could you ask someone else to bring our drinks? The woman asked. You look unhygienic. Chloe froze. The plate felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Unhygienic. She remembered telling me I looked like a beggar. She remembered telling me I would ruin the aesthetic. I washed my hands, she said, her voice breaking. Just get the manager. The woman sighed, rolling her eyes. Chloe turned around. She walked back to the station. She put the plate down. She felt tears pricking her eyes, hot and stinging. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them who she was. She wanted to tell them she used to wear diamonds. But she wasn't that person anymore. That person was dead. She took a deep breath and went back to work. She had to. She had rent to pay. An hour later, the incident happened. It was the end of the rush. The diner was quieting down, but the floor was a mess of napkins and spilled sugar. Chloe was carrying a tray of desserts to a booth in the back, a large slice of apple pie and a slice of sweet potato pie. As she walked past table 3, a customer stood up abruptly, backing his chair out without looking. The leg of the chair caught Chloe's ankle. She stumbled. She tried to correct her balance, but she was too tired. She fell forward. The tray flew out of her hands. The plates crashed onto the floor. The apple pie splattered against the booth. But the sweet potato pie? The sweet potato pie landed face down on the floor, right next to the customer's expensive leather boots. The customer was a man in a business suit. He looked down at his shoes. He looked at the orange filling smeared across the leather. He turned purple. You idiot, he roared. Look what you did. These are Italian leather. Chloe scrambled to her knees. She grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe the shoe. I am so sorry, she cried. I tripped. It was an accident. Get away from me! The man shouted, kicking her hand away. You are making it worse, you clumsy fool. Do you have any idea how much these cost? Chloe sat back on her heels amidst the broken ceramic and the ruined pie. The smell of the sweet potato filling hit her. It was sweet and spicy, nutmeg and cinnamon. It smelled exactly like the pie I had brought to her house on Thanksgiving. The memory crashed into her with the force of a physical blow. She saw me standing on her porch shivering in the snow. She saw Derek shoving me. She saw the Tupperware container hitting the ground. She saw the pie splattering on the welcome mat. She heard her own voice. Dad, look what you did. You made a mess. You are ruining the aesthetic. She looked at the man screaming at her. He was Derek. He was her. He was the embodiment of the cruelty she had inflicted on her own father. She looked at the pie on the floor. It was the same pie. It was the same scene. Only this time she was the one on the ground. She was the one being called trash. The manager, Rick, stormed over. What is going on here, he yelled. This waitress ruined my shoes, the customer shouted. I want her fired. I want the owner to pay for this. Rick looked at Chloe. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He didn't help her up. Get up, he spat. You are a disaster. Get in the back. Get a mop. And then get out of my sight. Chloe stood up. Her knees were bleeding. Her apron was covered in orange filling. She looked at the customer. She looked at Rick. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. The sob in her throat was too big. She turned and ran. She ran past the kitchen. She ran into the employee bathroom. She locked the door. The bathroom was small and dirty. The light flickered. The mirror was cracked. She looked at her reflection. She saw a woman she didn't recognize. A woman who was broken. A woman who was alone. She sank to the floor, sitting on the cold tiles next to the toilet. She buried her face in her knees and she wept. She didn't weep because she was fired. She didn't weep because she was poor. She wept because she finally understood. She understood the cold. She understood the shame. She understood what it felt like to be looked at as if you were nothing. "Dad," she whispered into the empty room. "Dad, I am so sorry." She remembered how I had looked at her that night, the pain in my eyes, the disappointment. She had done this to me. She had done this to the man who loved her more than anything, and now the universe was doing it to her. She cried until her chest ached. She cried until she had no tears left. She sat there in the silence of the bathroom, smelling the bleach and the sweet potato pie on her apron. She realized then that money wasn't a shield, status wasn't a shield, character was the only shield, and she had none. She had to build it, from scratch, from the floor of a dirty bathroom in a diner. She stood up. She washed her face in the sink. The cold water felt like a baptism. She looked in the mirror one last time. She wasn't Mrs. Stanton anymore. She wasn't the heiress. She was Chloe. Just Chloe. And she had a lot of work to do. She opened the door. She walked back out to the mop bucket. She started to clean up the mess she had made. And for the first time in her life, she did it without complaining, because she knew she deserved it. The manila envelope sat on the center of my mahogany desk like an unexploded bomb. It was the weekly report from the private investigator I had hired to watch over Chloe. I stared at it for a long time, my hand hovering over the clasp, dreading what I would find inside, but needing to know with a hunger that gnawed at my gut. It had been 2 weeks since I had turned her away from my office, 2 weeks since I had watched my only child dragged out of the building screaming for salvation. Every instinct in my body, every biological imperative of fatherhood screamed at me to pick up the phone, to send a car, to write a check, to fix it. That was what I had done her whole life. I had been the fixer. I had been the safety net. And look where it had gotten us. She had married a thief, she had become a stranger, and she had learned to value the price of things rather than the value of people. I opened the envelope. The photographs spilled out across the polished wood. They were grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but the misery in them was sharp and high definition. There was Chloe walking out of her basement apartment in the gray light of dawn. She looked thin. Her coat was not warm enough for the biting wind that whipped through the city streets. She was counting change at a bus stop, her brow furrowed in a way I had never seen before. It was the look of someone calculating if they could afford to eat lunch. I picked up another photo. It showed her standing behind the counter at the Rusty Spoon, the diner where she had found work. She was wiping down a table, her posture slumped, her face pale. She wasn't the princess anymore. She was just another tired woman trying to make rent. I traced her face in the photo with my thumb. It broke my heart. It shattered me to see her like this, stripped of her armor, exposed to the harshness of a world she had always looked down upon. But I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not call the landlord of her building to pay her rent for a year. I sat back in my leather chair and I forced myself to look at the reality I had helped create. For 30 years I had shielded her from the consequences of her actions. I had smoothed the road so she would never stumble. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was giving her the life I never had. But I was wrong. I had crippled her. I had taken away her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. If I helped her now, if I swooped in like a deus ex machina and pulled her out of the mud, she would never learn how to walk. She would always be looking for a savior. She would always be vulnerable to the next Derek Stanton who came along with a smile and a lie. She had to burn. She had to feel the heat. She had to forge herself in the fire of her own mistakes. It was the only way she would ever be strong enough to inherit the empire I had built. I wasn't punishing her. I was raising her. Finally. 30 years too late, but I was raising her. However, there is a difference between letting someone learn to swim and letting them drown. I read the investigator's typed report. It detailed her shifts, her tips, her commute. And then I saw a paragraph that made my blood run cold. It described the owner of the diner, a man named Henderson. The report noted that he had a history of wage theft and workplace harassment. It noted that he had been seen yelling at Chloe, grabbing her arm when she was too slow, threatening to fire her if she didn't smile more. I put the report down. My hands were shaking, not with age, but with a cold, focused rage. I would let her struggle. I would let her be poor. I would let her be tired. But I would not let her be abused. There is a line, and Mr. Henderson had just crossed it without even knowing I was watching. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I grabbed my cane. I wasn't going to the diner to bring her home. I was going to the diner to buy the block. I arrived at the Rusty Spoon an hour later. It was between the lunch and dinner rush, the lull, when the smell of stale grease and old coffee hangs heavy in the air. I sat in my car across the street and watched. I saw Chloe moving behind the counter refilling ketchup bottles. She looked exhausted, but she was moving with a rhythm, a determination I hadn't seen before. She wasn't complaining, she was working. I waited until she went into the back to do inventory. Then I walked in. The bell above the door jingled. The place was empty except for a few truckers in the corner. I walked straight to the office in the back, bypassing the employees only sign. Henderson was sitting at a messy desk counting cash. He looked up, startled, his eyes narrowing as he took in my suit, my watch, my demeanor. He was a small man, with small eyes, and a spirit that smelled of grease. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice rough. "You can't be back here." I closed the door behind me. I didn't sit down. I stood over him, leaning on my cane, letting my shadow fall across his desk. "My name is Augustus Freeman," I said. "I represent Freeman Capital." He blinked. The name meant something even in this dump. He knew who I was. Or at least he knew the name. "What does a venture capitalist want with a spoon?" he asked, trying to sound tough but failing. "I want to buy it," I said. "Buy it!" He laughed, a nervous hacking sound. "It is not for sale. Everything is for sale." "Mr. Henderson," I said, "it is just a matter of price. And looking at your books." I glanced at the open ledger on his desk. "You are 3 months behind on your vendor payments. You have a health code violation pending from last week, and your lease is up for renewal next month. You are not in a position to negotiate." I pulled a check from my pocket. It was already written. The amount was generous, more than the place was worth, but less than I made in an hour. "This is a cashier's check," I said, placing it on the pile of dirty money he was counting. "It is for the business, the equipment, the lease, and your immediate resignation." He looked at the number. His eyes bulged. Greed waged a war with confusion on his face. "Why?" he asked. "Why this dump?" "That is my business," I said. "Do we have a deal?" He reached for the check. His hands were trembling. Yeah, we have a deal." "When do you want the keys?" Now I said. I called in my legal team. They were waiting in the parking lot. Within 20 minutes, the papers were signed. Henderson was gone, walking out the back door with his check looking like he had won the lottery. He didn't know he had just been evicted by a ghost. I sat in the office. I was the owner now, but I couldn't be the face. If Chloe knew I owned the place, she would think it was charity. She would think she was safe. She would stop fighting. I picked up the phone and called the shift manager, a woman named Sarah, who the investigator said was fair and hard-working. I asked her to come to the office. She walked in, wiping her hands on her apron, looking worried. She saw me sitting in Henderson's chair. "Who are you?" she asked. "Where is Henderson?" "Mr. Henderson has retired," I said. "My name is Mr. Freeman. I am the new owner." She looked at me, assessing. She was tough. I liked her. "Okay," she said. "Am I fired?" "No," I said. "In fact, you are promoted. You are the general manager now. I am a silent partner. I will not be here. You run the place." She nodded slowly. "Okay. What are the orders?" I stood up and walked to the door, looking through the crack at Chloe, who was out on the floor again, pouring coffee for a new customer. "You have a waitress," I said. "Chloe." Sarah followed my gaze. "Yeah. The new girl. She is trying. She is a bit green, but she works hard. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Sarah," I said, turning back to her. "You are to treat that woman exactly like every other employee." Sarah frowned. "I don't understand." "She gets no special treatment," I said. "She works the same shifts. She cleans the same toilets. She keeps her tips, and she lives on her wages. If she is late, you write her up. If she is rude to a customer, you reprimand her. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said, looking confused. But I continued, my voice dropping to a low steel rumble. "You are to ensure her safety, absolute safety. No one harasses her, not the customers, not the cooks, and certainly not you. If anyone touches her, if anyone threatens her, you throw them out. You call the police, and then you call me." Sarah looked at me. She looked at Chloe. She saw the resemblance in the eyes, the set of the jaw. She was smart. She figured it out. "She is family," Sarah whispered. "She is an employee," I corrected. and she needs to learn how to stand on her own feet, but she does not need to be crushed. Can you do that, Sarah? Can you be fair but protective? Yes, sir, Sarah said. I can do that. Good, I said. I walked to the back door. I paused. One more thing, I said. She never knows. She never knows I bought this place. She never knows I was here. As far as she is concerned, Henderson sold to a holding company and you are the boss. If she finds out, Sarah, I will close this place down and turn it into a parking lot. I understand, Sarah said. I walked out into the alley. The cold air hit me, cleansing the smell of grease from my suit. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and watched the front window of the diner. I saw Chloe laughing at something a customer said. It was a tired laugh, but it was real. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just a waitress doing her job. I felt a lump in my throat. It was pride, a strange, twisted kind of pride. She was surviving. She was eating the bread of sorrow, but she was digesting it. She was becoming real. I had bought the stage, but she was writing the play. I started the car. I couldn't stay. I couldn't risk her seeing me. I had to remain the villain in her story, so she could become the hero in hers. I drove away, leaving my daughter in the care of a stranger scrubbing tables for minimum wage. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than building the company, harder than burying my wife. But as I merged onto the highway heading back to my empty penthouse, I knew it was the only way. I was watching. I was always watching. And one day when she was strong enough, when she had scrubbed the entitlement off her soul along with the grease off the tables, I would walk through that door and order a cup of coffee. But not today. Today she had work to do. And so did I. The calendar on my mahogany desk read November 28th. It was Thanksgiving again. Exactly 365 days had passed since the night I was left standing in the snow with a ruined pie and a broken heart. The weather in Connecticut was identical to that terrible evening. The sky was a heavy, bruised purple, and the wind whipped through the bare branches of the oak trees lining my driveway with a mournful howl. Inside my estate, the air was warm and smelled of roasting turkey prepared by a private chef, but the house felt vast and empty. I sat in my study watching the security monitors. I wasn't waiting for guests. I wasn't waiting for a party. I was waiting to see if my experiment had worked. For a year, I had watched my daughter from the shadows. I knew she was living in a fourth-floor walk-up apartment in the gritty part of New Haven. It was a studio with a radiator that clanked and a window that didn't quite close. I knew she was working double shifts at the diner, scrubbing tables and pouring coffee for minimum wage. I knew she had sold every piece of designer clothing she had managed to smuggle out of her old life just to pay the electric bill. I had watched her struggle. I had watched her cry. I had watched her grow thin. And I had done nothing. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew that if I intervened, if I sent a check or a bag of groceries, I would be robbing her of her redemption. She had to learn that survival wasn't something you were given, it was something you earned. But today was different. Today was the anniversary of her great betrayal. I wondered if she remembered. I wondered if the date burned in her mind the way it burned in mine. I switched the camera feed to the exterior gate. The snow was falling softly, dusting the asphalt with white powder. And then I saw her. She wasn't driving a luxury car. She wasn't even in a taxi. She was walking. She had taken the public bus to the end of the line and walked the 2 miles up the hill to my estate. She looked nothing like the woman who had sneered at me a year ago. The emerald green gown and the diamonds were gone. She was wearing a heavy, shapeless wool coat that she had likely bought at a thrift store. Her hair wasn't piled high in an intricate bun. It was pulled back in a simple ponytail tucked under a knit hat. She wore thick, sensible boots, not the high heels that used to click arrogantly on my floors. She was carrying something. A plastic container hugged tight to her chest, protected from the wind. I zoomed in with the camera. Her face was red from the cold. She looked tired. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, lines etched by worry and work. But there was something else there too, a set to her jaw, a steadiness in her gaze. She didn't look like a spoiled princess anymore. She looked like a woman. She reached the massive iron gates of my estate, the same gates that guarded the empire she had once thought was her birthright. She didn't try to punch in the code. She didn't try to climb over. She simply stood there for a moment looking up at the house. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she remembering the comfort she used to take for granted? Was she regretting the husband she had chosen over her father? She pressed the intercom button. I sat forward in my chair, my heart hammering a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I didn't answer. I signaled my head of security, a man named Frank who was stationed in the gatehouse. "Frank," I said into my radio, "answer it. But be tough." "Yes, Mr. Freeman," Frank replied. I watched as Frank stepped out of the guard booth. He was a big man, intimidating in his uniform. He walked up to the gate, but he didn't open it. He looked at Chloe through the bars. "Can I help you?" Miss Frank asked, his voice gruff. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't demand to see the owner. She didn't scream, "Do you know who I am?" like she would have a year ago. She just adjusted her grip on the plastic container. "Hello?" she said, her voice quiet but clear. I am here to drop something off." "You have a delivery?" Frank asked. "We didn't order anything." "It is not an order," Chloe said. "It is a gift. For Mr. Freeman." Frank looked at the container. "What is it?" "It is a sweet potato pie," Chloe said. I felt a lump form in my throat. A sweet potato pie. I tried to make it. She continued, a shy, almost apologetic smile touching her lips. "It is his wife's recipe. My mother's recipe. I burned the crust a little bit. My oven, it runs hot and the dial is broken. But the filling is right. I used the extra nutmeg, just like she used to." I zoomed the camera in on her hands. They were raw chapped from the cold and from scrubbing dishes. I saw a small burn mark on her thumb. She had hurt herself making this. She had labored over it. She hadn't bought it from a bakery. She hadn't asked a chef to make it. She had peeled the potatoes herself. She had rolled the dough herself. "I am sorry," Miss Frank said, sticking to the script I had given him. "Mr. Freeman isn't accepting visitors today. He is having a private dinner." "I know," Chloe said quickly. "I don't expect him to see me. I know I am not welcome here. I don't want to disturb him. I don't want to ruin his aesthetic." She used the word. Aesthetic. The word she had used to hurt me, but now she used it on herself, acknowledging her own unworthiness. "I just want you to give this to him," she said, extending the container through the bars. "Please." Frank hesitated. He looked up at the camera, knowing I was watching. He was waiting for a signal. I stayed silent. I wanted to see what she would do if he refused. "I can't take unauthorized packages," Frank said. "Security protocol." Chloe didn't get angry. She didn't storm off. She just looked sad. "Please," she whispered. "Just tell him. Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I remember." "You remember what Frank asked." "I remember the taste," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I remember what it tasted like when we were a family. I remember that he walked through the snow for me last year and I let him fall. I just want him to know that I know what that walk feels like now. I walked here. It is cold. And I am sorry I left him in the cold." She placed the container on the ground inside the gate, pushing it through the bars so it sat on the dry pavement of the driveway. "Just leave it there," she said. "Maybe he will see it. Maybe he won't." But I tried. She stood up. She wiped her eyes with her woolen mitten. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said to the guard. She turned around. She didn't linger. She didn't look back at the warm windows of the mansion. She started the long walk back down the hill, back to the bus stop, back to her cold apartment and her lonely life. I watched her go. I watched her small figure retreating into the gray afternoon. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't asked for a job. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She had simply performed an act of service. She had tried to give something back. It was burnt. It was humble. It was imperfect. And it was the most beautiful thing she had ever given me. I picked up the radio. "Frank." I said, my voice thick. "Yes, sir." "Bring the pie inside," I said. And Frank. "Yes, sir." "Call a car," I said. "Not a limo. Just a sedan. Have the driver follow her. Don't let her see him. Just make sure she gets home safe. It is too cold to walk." "Understood, sir." I sat back in my chair. I watched Frank retrieve the plastic container. He walked it up to the house. A few minutes later, my housekeeper brought it into the study. She placed it on my desk next to my computer. I looked at it. It was a cheap Tupperware container, the kind you reuse from takeout. I opened the lid. The pie was indeed burnt around the edges. The crust was uneven. It looked nothing like the perfect pies Lucille used to make. I took a plastic fork from my drawer. I cut a small slice. I put it in my mouth. It tasted of nutmeg and cinnamon. It tasted of burnt sugar. It tasted of effort. It tasted of repentance. I closed my eyes and savored it. For the first time in a year, the bitterness that had coated my tongue washed away. She was learning. She was understanding that love wasn't about the price tag. It was about the time. It was about the burn on her thumb. I wasn't ready to let her back in. Not fully. Not yet. She needed more time. She needed to know that she could survive the winter on her own. She needed to build her own fire before she could share mine. But she had taken the first step. She had walked up the hill. I took another bite of the pie. Next year, I thought. Next year, maybe I will open the gate. But for now, I would watch. I would wait. And I would let the taste of this burnt pie remind me that even the most broken things can be rebuilt if you are willing to stand in the heat. I pulled up the file on my computer labeled Chloe's Trust. It was still empty. I didn't fill it. Not today. Instead, I opened a new file. I labeled it The Bakery. I had seen a small vacant storefront near her apartment. It was run down. It needed work. But it had good bones. Maybe I thought. Maybe in a few months, a silent investor might purchase that building. Maybe that investor would look for a manager. Someone who knew the value of hard work. Someone who knew how to make a sweet potato pie. I smiled. Happy Thanksgiving. Chloe, I whispered to the empty room. The lesson was working. The seed I had planted in the scorched earth of her life was finally starting to sprout. I turned back to the monitor, watching the black sedan trail her bus as it wound its way back to the city. She was safe. She was growing. And I was the proudest father in the world. The heavy iron gate clicked, and the electronic lock disengaged with a metallic thud that echoed in the frozen silence of the driveway. I stepped out of the gatehouse, not waiting for Frank to open the main barriers. I walked through the pedestrian exit, the cold wind hitting me instantly, biting through my suit jacket. I hadn't grabbed my coat. I didn't want the insulation. I wanted to feel the same biting chill that was turning my daughter's cheeks red. I wanted to stand in the same air she was breathing to bridge the gap that had existed between us for 365 days. Chloe had stopped about 20 yards down the road. She heard the gate open. She froze. Her shoulders tensed under that shapeless thrift store coat. She didn't turn around immediately. I think she was afraid. She was afraid that I was coming out to yell at her or to tell her to take her burnt pie and throw it in the trash herself. She was afraid that the rejection she had delivered to me a year ago was about to be returned to her with interest. Chloe, I called out. My voice wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the winter afternoon it carried perfectly. She turned slowly. She looked terrified. Her face was raw from the cold and the crying. She clutched her hands together in front of her chest, a defensive posture as if she were bracing for a physical blow. She looked at me standing there at the edge of my kingdom, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look at me with expectation or entitlement. She looked at me with reverence and fear. I walked toward her. I held the plastic Tupperware container in my hand. It felt light, but it carried the weight of a year of silence. The snow crunched under my boots. I stopped 3 feet away from her. I could see the fraying threads on her knit hat. I could see the chapped skin on her lips. I could see the poverty she had been living in, and it tore at my heart, but I kept my face impassive. I needed to know if this was real. I needed to know if the change went down to the bone. You forgot something, I said, holding out the container. Chloe looked at the pie, then up at my eyes. She blinked, and a fresh tear tracked through the cold redness of her cheek. I left it for you, she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't want to disturb you. I just wanted you to have it. I looked down at the container. I popped the lid. The smell of nutmeg and burnt sugar wafted up, swirling in the cold air. It was a smell that reminded me of kitchens from 40 years ago, of mistakes made and lessons learned. I looked at the blackened crust, the uneven filling. It was ugly. It was a disaster of a pie. I took a plastic fork from my pocket. I broke off a piece of the crust along with a glob of the orange filling. I put it in my mouth. Chloe held her breath. She watched me chew. She watched me taste the bitterness of the burnt dough and the sweetness of the potato. She watched me judge her offering. I swallowed. The taste lingered heavy and carbonized. It is burnt, I said, my voice flat. Chloe let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. I know she cried. I know it is burnt. I tried, Dad. I really tried. But the oven, the dial is broken, and I couldn't regulate the heat, and I didn't have enough money to buy more ingredients to start over. I ruined it, just like I ruined everything else. She covered her face with her mittened hands. Her shoulders shook. The dam broke. I am sorry, she wailed, the sound tearing through the quiet street. I am so sorry. I was so blind, Dad. I was so stupid and blind. I looked at you, and I didn't see my father. I saw an obstacle. I saw an embarrassment. I let Derek tell me who you were instead of remembering who you actually were. She dropped to her knees. Right there in the snow on the side of the public road, my daughter collapsed. She didn't care about the wet slush soaking into her jeans. She didn't care about the cold. She bowed her head until it was almost touching my boots. It was the posture of a penitent. It was the posture of someone who had been stripped of all pride, all ego, all vanity. Please forgive me, she sobbed into the snow. I don't want the money. I don't care about the house. I just want my dad back. I am so lonely, Dad. I am so cold, and I am so lonely. I looked down at her. I saw the top of her head, the cheap wool hat wet with snow. I remembered when she was 5 years old and she would kneel like this to look for bugs in the garden. I remembered when she was 10 and she would kneel to pray by her bedside. But this kneeling, this was different. This was the kneeling of a broken woman. And it made me angry, not at her, but at the world that had told her she had to be rich to be valuable. At Derek, who had made her feel that she had to bow to status. And at myself for letting her stay in the cold for so long. I handed the pie to Frank, who had quietly followed me out the gate. He took it and stepped back, giving us space. I reached down. I grabbed Chloe by the arms. My grip was strong, the grip of a man who had built skyscrapers. I pulled her up. I didn't just help her stand. I hauled her to her feet with a force that made her gasp. I pulled her up until she was standing straight, until she was looking me in the eye. Stop it, I commanded, my voice rough with emotion. She looked at me, startled by the intensity of my tone. Look at me, Chloe, I said. She met my gaze, her eyes swimming with tears. Stand up, I said. Stand up straight. She straightened her spine, sniffling. We are Freemans, I said. And in this family we do not kneel. She blinked, the tears freezing on her lashes. We do not bow to anyone. I continued, my voice rising. We do not bow to poverty, we do not bow to shame, and we certainly do not bow to mistakes. You made a mistake, Chloe, a big one. You fell down, but you do not stay down. I brushed the snow off her knees with my own hands. I dusted off her coat. You kneel to God, I said, and you kneel to tie your shoes. That is it. Do you understand me? She nodded slowly, a fresh wave of tears spilling over, but this time she didn't look down. She looked at me. I understand, she whispered. I looked at her face. I saw the woman emerging from the ruins of the girl. I saw the strength that the last year of struggle had forged in her. She was thinner, yes. She was tired, yes. But she was real. She wasn't hiding behind makeup and lies anymore. I took the pie back from Frank. I put the lid on it. It is burnt, I said again, looking at the container. Chloe flinched, ready for another rejection. But I continued, the filling is perfect. You got the nutmeg right. Her eyes widened. I remembered you liked it that way. I do, I said. I tucked the pie under my arm. It takes a lot of courage to bring a burnt pie to a billionaire's gate, I said. It takes a lot of guts to walk 2 miles in the snow just to say you are sorry. I touched her cheek. My hand was warm against her cold skin. You have character, Chloe, I said. You finally found it. You found it in that diner. You found it in that cold apartment. And you brought it here. Dad, she choked out, leaning her face into my hand. I am not going to give you money, I said. I am not going to buy you a house. Not today. I know, she said. I don't want it. But I continued. I am not going to let you walk back to the bus stop. I signaled to Frank. Bring the car around, I said. The sedan. Frank nodded and spoke into his radio. I looked back at Chloe. You are going to get in that car, I told her. The driver is going to take you to your apartment. He is going to wait until you are inside and safe. She nodded, grateful. Thank you, Dad. And Chloe, I added. Yes, next week, I said. On Tuesday, I have a meeting downtown, near your diner. Her eyes lit up. A spark of hope, of connection. I might stop in, I said. For a coffee. If the service is good. She smiled. A real smile. It cracked through the sadness on her face like the sun breaking through winter clouds. It was the smile of the daughter I used to know. The service is excellent, she said. I will make the coffee myself. Fresh pot. Good, I said. And bring a slice of pie. But try not to burn it this time. She laughed. It was a watery, shaky laugh, but it was the best sound I had heard in a year. I promise, she said. No burnt crusts. The black sedan pulled up beside us. The driver jumped out and opened the door. The interior looked warm and inviting. Get in, I said. Go home. Get warm. She stepped toward the car, then stopped. She turned back to me. She didn't hug me. She knew we weren't there yet. She knew she still had work to do. But she looked me in the eye and she stood tall. I love you, Dad, she said. I love you too, Chloe, I said. She got in. The door closed. I watched the car pull away, the taillights fading into the gray afternoon. I stood there for a moment in the cold holding the burnt pie. I looked at the spot in the snow where she had knelt. The indentations were already filling in with fresh flakes. She had knelt as a beggar, but she had risen as a freeman. I turned and walked back through the gate. Frank closed it behind me. I walked up the driveway to the big empty house. I went into my study. I sat down at my desk and placed the pie in the center of the blotter. I took a fork and ate another bite. It tasted like smoke and sugar. It tasted like struggle. It was the best pie I had ever eaten. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number. Marcus, I said when he answered. Yes? Mr. Freeman? That bakery property, I said. The one near the diner? Yes, sir. The dilapidated one. Buy it, I said. Buy it tomorrow. Put it in a blind trust. Renovate it. Top-of-the-line ovens. Industrial mixers. Make it perfect. You are giving it to her, Marcus asked. No, I said. I am getting it ready. She isn't ready for it yet. She needs a few more months of coffee and humility. But when she is ready, when she can bake a pie that doesn't burn, I want her to have a kitchen worthy of her potential. Understood, sir? And Marcus, I said. Yes. Get me the recipe for sweet potato pie. The one with the extra nutmeg. I think I need to practice. I have a feeling I am going to be having guests for Thanksgiving next year. I hung up. I looked out the window at the snow. The world was white and clean. The past was buried. My daughter was coming back. Not the socialite, not the snob. My daughter. And this time she was walking on her own 2 feet. The bell above the diner door jingled softly, a sound that usually signaled another customer and another 20 minutes of aching feet, but tonight it signaled the end of an era. It was 11 o'clock at night. The rusty spoon was empty save for the cook who was scraping the grill in the back and Chloe who was sitting in a booth counting a pile of crumpled singles and fives. I stood in the doorway watching her. She didn't look up immediately. She was too focused on the math of survival. She was mouthing numbers, calculating rent, calculating bus fare, calculating the cost of a loaf of bread. I walked over to the booth. My shadow fell across her table, darkening the small pile of money she had earned with her own sweat. She froze. Her hand hovered over a $5 bill. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide and tired. When she saw me, she didn't smile and she didn't cringe. She just straightened her back. It was a small movement, but it spoke volumes. The old Chloe would have slouched or performed a dramatic sigh. This Chloe simply braced herself for reality. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice was raspy from shouting orders over the noise of the lunch rush. "Hello, Chloe," I said. "May I sit?" I asked. She nodded, gesturing to the cracked vinyl seat opposite her. "It is a free country," she said, a ghost of her old sarcasm surfacing, but without the venom. I sat down. I placed my hands on the table. They were clean, manicured, the hands of a man who moved capital. Her hands were right next to mine. They were red. The knuckles were swollen. There was a burn mark on her wrist from the coffee pot, and her nails were cut short and unpolished. They were the hands of a worker. I looked at them with more pride than I had ever looked at her diamonds. "You are closing up," I observed. She nodded, continuing to stack the bills. "Rick wants the register balanced before midnight. I am short $3. I think I gave someone too much change during the rush. It comes out of my pocket." She took $3 from her tip pile and put it into the register stack. She didn't complain. She just paid her debt. "I have been watching you, Chloe," I said quietly. "I know," she said without looking up. "I saw the car sometimes. The black sedan down the street. I figured it was you, or maybe the feds looking for Derek. But I figured they wouldn't just watch. I wasn't watching to spy, I said. I was watching to see if you would quit, and she asked, meeting my gaze. You didn't quit, I said. You showed up, you took the abuse, you cleaned the mess, you survived. She shrugged a gesture that felt heavy. I didn't have a choice, Dad. Hunger is a very effective alarm clock. There is always a choice, I corrected her. You could have found another man to leech off of. You could have tried to sell your story to a tabloid. You could have run away. But you stayed. You worked. She looked out the window at the dark street. I realized something she said softly. When I was sitting on that curb after Derek hit me, I realized that I had never actually done anything. I mean, really done anything. I went to school on your money. I got jobs because of your connections. I married Derek because of his potential. I was a passenger in my own life, Dad, and when the car crashed, I didn't know how to drive. She looked back at me, her eyes fierce and clear. I am driving now, she said. It is a beat-up car and I am going 5 miles an hour, but I am driving. I reached into my inside pocket. I pulled out a folder. It wasn't thick. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a proposal. I slid it across the table. What is this? She asked, looking at it warily. Is it legal papers? Are you suing me too? Open it, I said. She opened the folder. Inside was a brochure. It wasn't for a vacation. It wasn't for a car. It was for the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the best design schools in the country. Clipped to the brochure was an application form already filled out with her information and an acceptance letter dated 3 years ago. She stared at it. Her mouth opened slightly. You kept this, she whispered. You got accepted 3 years ago, I said. Before you met Derek. Before you decided that being a socialite was more important than having a skill. You wanted to be an interior architect. You had talent, Chloe. I saw your sketches. I saw the way you looked at buildings. You understood structure and flow. You had the eye. She touched the acceptance letter, her fingers trembling. I threw this away, she said. I told you design was for people who had to work. I told you I was going to be a philanthropist. And how did that work out? I asked gently. She let out a short, bitter laugh. I donated my dignity to a con man. I leaned forward. The offer is still open, I said. I spoke to the dean. He remembers your portfolio. He says the spot is yours if you want it. The semester starts in January. Chloe looked at the brochure. I saw the hunger in her eyes, the hunger to create, the hunger to be something other than a waitress or a wife. But then the light faded. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. I can't, she said. Why not? Look at me, Dad, she said, gesturing to her apron. Tuition is $60,000 a year. Rent in Providence is $2,000 a month. I have $300 in tips and a checking account that is overdrawn. I can't afford a bus ticket to Rhode Island, let alone tuition. I tapped the folder. I am not asking you to pay for it, I said. She stiffened. Her face went cold. No, she said, shaking her head violently. No, I am not taking your money. I am not doing that again. I am not going to be the charity case. I am not going to be the daughter who runs back to Daddy's wallet the moment things get hard. I would rather serve coffee for the rest of my life than be that person again. I am not offering you a gift, Chloe, I said, my voice hard and businesslike. I am offering you a loan. She paused. A loan. I pulled a second document from the folder. It was a contract. A loan agreement drafted by Freeman Capital. Read the terms, I said. She picked it up. She read the first page. Lender Augustus Freeman. Borrower Chloe Freeman. Principal amount $200,000. Purpose education and living expenses. She looked up at me confused. Keep reading, I said. She read the next paragraph. Interest rate 7%. Compounded annually. Repayment schedule. Payments to commence 6 months after graduation. Minimum monthly payment. $1,500. Collateral, future earnings, and equity in any future business ventures. 7%, she whispered. Dad, that is the market rate. That is high. It is the rate I would charge a stranger, I said. It is the rate I charge businesses that I think are high risk but have high potential. I looked her in the eye. I am not giving you this money, I said. I am investing in you, and I expect a return on my investment. If you fail, if you drop out, if you decide to run off with another Derek Stanton, you will owe me every cent. I will garnish your wages. I will sue you. I will treat you exactly like any other debtor who defaulted on a Freeman Capital loan. You would sue me? She asked. I sued your husband, I said. I evicted your in-laws. Do you think I am bluffing? She looked at me. She searched my face for any sign of softness, any sign that this was just a game. But she found only the iron resolve that had built an empire. No, she said. I don't think you are bluffing. So I asked, do we have a deal? She looked at the contract. She looked at the interest rate. It was a burden. It was a heavy weight to strap onto her back. It meant that for the next 10 years she would be working to pay me back. It meant she wouldn't be free. But it also meant something else. It meant I respected her. I wasn't treating her like a child. I wasn't treating her like a princess. I was treating her like a partner. I was treating her like a woman who could carry a load. She picked up a pen from her apron pocket. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint pen, the kind that leaked ink. I don't want a handout, she said, her voice fierce. I want to earn it. I want to pay you back every single dime. I want to write you a check one day that clears the whole balance, and I want to look you in the face and say, we are even. That is the goal, I said. She signed the paper. She didn't hesitate. She signed it Chloe Freeman. She pressed down hard, carving her name into the paper. She handed it back to me. There, she said, you have your contract. I checked the signature. It was strong. It was legible. Good, I said, putting the contract in my pocket. The funds will be deposited into a restricted account tomorrow. You can only use it for tuition, books, and rent. I will see the statements. If I see a charge for a handbag, if I see a charge for a spa day, the funding stops. Instantly. I won't buy a handbag, she said, touching her messy hair. I don't need handbags. I need a drafting table. She stood up. She took off her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the table. I have to give Rick my 2 weeks' notice, she said. I am not going to leave him short-handed. I nodded. That is professional. She looked at me. For a moment I thought she was going to hug me, but she didn't. She held out her hand. Thank you, Mr. Freeman, she said, for the business opportunity. I stood up and took her hand. It was rough and warm. You are welcome, Ms. Freeman, I said. Make it pay. She turned and walked toward the kitchen to find Rick. She walked differently now. She wasn't trudging. She was marching. She had a destination. She had a debt. And for the first time in her life, she had a purpose. I watched her go. I felt a tightness in my chest, a swelling of pride that was far greater than the day she married Derek. That day, she had been a doll dressed up in white silk. Today, she was a soldier dressed in denim and sweat. I walked out of the diner into the cold night air. The snow had stopped. The stars were out. I had lost my little girl, but I had found something better. I had found a successor. It would take time. It would take work. She would stumble. She would fall. But she would get up because she owed me money. And in the Freeman family, we pay our debts. I got into my car. To the office, I told the driver. It was midnight, but I wasn't tired. I had a new investment to manage. And this one was going to be the biggest return of my life. The steel doors of the correctional facility slid open with a heavy mechanical groan that sounded like the jaws of a beast spitting out something that tasted rotten. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, exactly 3 years and 4 months since Derek Stanton had been dragged out of a courtroom screaming my name. He was getting out early. Good behavior, the parole board called it. Manipulation, I called it. Derek was a chameleon. He knew how to smile at the guards, he knew how to quote scripture to the chaplain, and he knew how to act like a broken man who had found redemption in a concrete cell. But I knew better. You can shave a wolf and teach it to sit, but the moment you turn your back, it will still go for your throat. I wasn't there to meet him. I had better things to do. But my private investigator was there, parked in a nondescript sedan 300 yards away with a long lens camera. I watched the footage later in my office. Derek stepped out into the free world wearing a cheap suit the state had given him. He looked thinner. His hair was graying at the temples. He took a deep breath of the cold air and smiled. It wasn't a smile of gratitude, it was a smile of hunger. He looked around expecting a limousine. He expected Chloe. He expected me. He expected that the world had paused while he was away and that his place at the table was still set. When he realized no one was there, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into a sneer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He lit one, his hand steady. He walked to the bus stop. He didn't look like a man who was ready to work. He looked like a man who was ready to hunt. And I knew exactly who his prey was. He didn't go to a halfway house. He didn't go to an employment agency. He went straight to the library. Not to read, but to use the free internet. He spent 3 hours searching. He wasn't looking for jobs. He was looking for Chloe. It didn't take him long. Chloe wasn't hiding. She was living her life in the open proud of the small, honest existence she had built. He found her address. He found her schedule. And then he made his move. It was 2 days later when he found her. Chloe was walking home from her evening class at the design school. She was carrying a heavy portfolio case under one arm and a bag of groceries in the other. It was raining a cold, sleeting rain that turned the city streets into mirrors of neon light. She looked tired. She had worked a double shift at the diner before going to class. Her eyes were shadowed, but her chin was up. She was fighting for her future 1 credit hour at a time. She didn't hear him coming. Derek had learned how to move quietly in prison. He stepped out from the shadows of an alleyway blocking her path just a block from her apartment building. "Chloe," he said, his voice smooth, like oil on water. She stopped. She dropped her grocery bag. An orange rolled across the wet pavement. She stared at him as if he were a ghost. "Derek," she whispered. He smiled, that same charming, predatory smile that had fooled her 5 years ago. He opened his arms as if expecting a hug. "Hello, baby," he said. "I missed you. Every single day I missed you." Chloe took a step back, clutching her portfolio to her chest like a shield. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You aren't supposed to be here." "I am a free man, Chloe," he said, taking a step toward her. "I paid my debt to society. I am rehabilitated. I am a new man. And the first thing I wanted to do was see my wife." Ex-wife, Chloe corrected him. "The divorce was final 2 years ago, Derek. We have nothing to say to each other. It is just paper, baby," he said, dismissing the legal dissolution of their marriage with a wave of his hand. "We have a history. We have a bond. And look at you." He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the expensive-looking drafting supplies sticking out of her bag. He looked at the textbooks. He looked at her coat, which was warm and new. "You look good," he said, his tone shifting from romantic to calculating. "You look taken care of." "Taken care? I take care of myself," Chloe said. Derek laughed a low, dark sound. "Come on, Chloe, I know you. You aren't a worker bee, you are a princess. I see the art school supplies. That is not cheap. Tuition is expensive. Rent is expensive." He took another step, invading her personal space. "Daddy is paying for it, isn't he?" Derek whispered, his eyes gleaming with greed. "The old man took you back. He is writing the checks again. I knew he would. He is soft." Chloe stared at him, realizing for the first time that he hadn't changed at all. Prison hadn't humbled him, it had just made him hungrier. He didn't see her. He didn't see her struggle or her growth. He just saw a conduit to my bank account. He thought she was back on the payroll and he wanted his cut. "He gave me a loan," she said, her voice cold. "A loan with interest. I pay for everything myself." Derek sneered. "Sure you do." "A loan. Is that what we are calling it now, to keep the tax man happy? Whatever. It doesn't matter. If he is paying for you, he can pay for me too. We are a package deal, Chloe. I am the one who introduced you to the high life. Remember, I am the one who gave you style. You owe me. I owe you nothing." She spat. "You ruined my life. You humiliated my father, and you abandoned me," he shouted, his facade cracking, revealing the violence underneath. "You left me to rot in a cage. You didn't write, you didn't visit, you let me suffer alone." "I was suffering too," Chloe yelled back. "I was scrubbing floors while you were sitting in a cell feeling sorry for yourself." "I am done suffering," Derek growled. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her coat. "You are going to help me. You are going to talk to your father. You are going to tell him I am back and I am ready to work. Or maybe you just give me some cash right now. I know you have it. Give me what is in your purse. Let go of me," she screamed, struggling against his grip. "I am not playing games, Chloe. Give me the money. I need a place to stay. I need clothes. I am entitled to half of what you have." He was shaking her now, the portfolio falling from her hands and spilling sketches onto the wet sidewalk. Drawings she had spent weeks on were soaking up the rain. "Help," Chloe screamed. "Someone help me!" Derek clamped a hand over her mouth. "Shut up," he hissed. "Don't make a scene. Just give me the money and I will go, for now. But I will be back. We are going to be partners again, baby, just like old times." Suddenly a siren wailed. Not in the distance, but right around the corner. Blue and red lights flooded the alleyway, blinding them both. Derek froze. He looked up. A police cruiser skidded to a halt at the curb. 2 officers jumped out, hands on their holsters. "Step away from her," one officer commanded. Derek let go of Chloe, raising his hands slowly. "Whoa, whoa, officers," he said, putting on his harmless act. "It is okay. This is my wife. We are just having a disagreement, a lover's quarrel." "She is not your wife," the officer said, walking forward, his face grim, "and you are in violation of a restraining order." "Restraining order?" Derek blinked, confusion washing over his face. "What restraining order? She didn't serve me with anything. She didn't," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "Her father did." Derek looked at Chloe. She was backing away, her chest, heaving, tears mixing with the rain on her face. He didn't know. He had been so focused on finding her, so focused on the money, that he hadn't bothered to check the legal filings against him upon his release. I had anticipated this moment 3 years ago. The day he went to prison, I filed a petition for a permanent protective order on behalf of my daughter, citing his history of financial abuse and instability. It was a standing order, lifetime duration, active the moment he stepped foot outside the prison walls. Any contact, any proximity within 500 feet was a felony violation of his parole. You set me up," Derek whispered, looking at Chloe with a look of pure betrayal. "I didn't set you up," Chloe said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I protected myself. My father protected me, because he knew you would come back. He knew you were a parasite." The officer spun Derek around and slammed him against the brick wall. "Derek Stanton, you are under arrest for violation of a protective order, harassment, and attempted robbery." The officer recited the Miranda rights, sounding like a funeral dirge for Derek's freedom. "No," Derek screamed, struggling against the cuffs. "You can't do this. I just got out. I have been out for 2 days." "And now you are going back," the officer said, tightening the cuffs. "I didn't do anything. I just wanted to talk to her. She has my money. Her father has my money. You have the right to remain silent." The officer continued, dragging him toward the car. Derek looked back at Chloe. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Chloe, help me. Tell them we are family." Chloe stood there, surrounded by her ruined drawings and her spilled groceries. She looked at the man who had promised her the world and given her nothing but pain. She looked at the man who saw her only as a wallet. "We are not family," she said quietly. "We are strangers." They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. He pressed his face against the glass, screaming silent obscenities, his breath fogging the window. The car pulled away, leaving Chloe standing alone in the rain. But she wasn't alone. A black town car pulled up behind the police cruiser. The window rolled down. It was me. I had been there the whole time, parked down the street watching. I had alerted the police the moment my private investigator told me Derek was making his move. I wasn't going to let him touch her. I wasn't going to let him drag her back down into his mud. I opened the door. "Get in, Chloe," I said. She looked at me. She picked up her wet portfolio. She left the groceries on the ground. She ran to the car and dove into the back seat, burying her face in my shoulder. She sobbed, shaking with the release of adrenaline and terror. I held her. I smoothed her hair. "He is gone," I whispered. "He is gone for good this time. Violation of parole means he serves the remainder of his sentence plus new charges. He won't see the sun for a long time. He thought you were paying for everything," she cried into my coat. "He thought I was rich again. He didn't care about me, Dad. He just wanted the money." "I know, baby," I said. "I know. That is why we had to be ready." I looked out the window at the empty street. The orange from her grocery bag was sitting in a puddle, bobbing slightly in the wind. He never learned, I said more to myself than to her. He had 3 years to think about his life, and he came out the exact same man who went in. Some people are just broken. They are empty vessels that can never be filled. I signaled the driver. "Take us home," I said. "Not to her apartment, to my home. Just for tonight." She needed a hot meal. She needed a warm bed. She needed to know that she was safe. As we drove away, I felt Chloe relax against me. She was safe. She was free. And for the first time, I knew that she truly understood the value of what she had. She had lost a husband, but she had found her self-worth. And Derek was back in a cage he had built bar by bar with his own greed. I closed my eyes. The past was finally buried. Now we could focus on the future. The snow began to fall over the city of Boston just as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the skyscrapers in shades of violet and steel gray. It was Thanksgiving Day, 5 years to the week since the night I was left standing in the cold with a ruined pie and a broken heart. But tonight I wasn't cold. I was sitting in a leather armchair in a loft apartment in the historic district watching the snow dust the windowsill. The apartment was beautiful. It had exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and light fixtures that looked like modern art. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble floors or gold toilets, but it had something the house on Oak Lane never had. It had soul. This was Chloe's home, and she had paid for every single brick of it herself. I watched her in the kitchen. She was wearing a simple apron over a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was moving with confidence, chopping vegetables, checking the oven, tasting the gravy. She wasn't barking orders at a catering staff. She wasn't stressing about the aesthetic or worrying about what an influencer might think. She was cooking dinner for her father. Over the last 5 years, I had watched my daughter transform. It wasn't an easy road. There were months where she ate ramen noodles. There were nights she called me crying because the work was too hard or the professors were too demanding. But she never asked for a handout. She borrowed the money for tuition, and she paid back every single cent with interest, just like the contract said. She graduated at the top of her class. She started as a junior associate at a small firm and worked her way up. Now she was one of the most sought-after interior architects in the city, known for her ability to turn broken spaces into sanctuaries. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked over at me. "Dinner is almost ready, Dad," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Are you hungry?" "I am always hungry for your cooking, Chloe," I said. She smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that crinkles the corners of your eyes. I stood up and walked to the table. It was set for two, just two. No CEOs, no social climbers, no parasites. There was a bottle of wine on the table, but it wasn't a $5,000 vintage meant to impress a boss. It was a $40 bottle of Pinot Noir that we both liked. We sat down. The turkey was golden brown. The stuffing was savory. The greens were seasoned perfectly. We ate in a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have forgiven each other. "You know, Dad," she said, putting her fork down, "I saw Derek last week." I paused my glass halfway to my mouth. "You did?" She nodded. "He was coming out of a pawn shop downtown. He looked old." He tried to wave at me. "And what did you do?" I asked. "I just kept walking," she said. "I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel sad, I just felt nothing. He is just a stranger to me now. A lesson I had to learn." I nodded slowly. "Indifference is the only true closure." "I am glad," I said. "You have built a good life here, Chloe. You built it the right way." "I had a good teacher," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You were tough on me, Dad. You let me fall. And I hated you for it for a long time. But now I know why you did it. If you had picked me up, I never would have learned how to climb." I squeezed her hand back. "I am proud of you, daughter. Not because of the awards, not because of the money, but because of who you are." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Save room," she said, standing up. "I have one more thing." She went into the kitchen. I waited, my heart beating a little faster. I knew what was coming. She returned carrying a pie plate. She set it down in the center of the table. It was a sweet potato pie. I looked at it. The crust was perfect, golden and flaky, not a single burnt edge in sight. The filling was a rich, deep orange, smooth and firm. It smelled of cinnamon, nutmeg, and brown sugar. It smelled like my kitchen 40 years ago. It smelled like Lucille. "I tried again," she whispered. "I think I got the oven temperature right this time." I picked up the knife. I cut a slice. It held its shape perfectly. I put it on a plate and took a bite. The flavor exploded in my mouth. It was sweet, but not too sweet. Spicy and comforting. It was perfection. It was the taste of redemption. I looked at her. "It is perfect," I said. "Your mother would be jealous." Chloe laughed, a sound of pure joy. We finished the pie. We drank the wine. We talked about her new project, renovating a library in the inner city. We talked about the stock market. We talked about everything and nothing. As the evening wound down, I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The snow was falling harder now, covering the grime of the streets in a pristine white blanket. I thought about the journey we had taken, from the garage to the penthouse, from the gutter to this warm loft. It had been a war, but we had won. I wasn't just a rich man anymore. I wasn't just a chairman. I was a father who had saved his child not with money, but with truth. Chloe came and stood beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Dad," she said. I wouldn't be anywhere else, I said. I looked at her reflection in the glass. She was strong. She was independent. She was a Freeman. You know, I said, reaching into my pocket. I have something for you. I pulled out a small velvet box. She looked at it wary. Dad, you know I don't want gifts. It is not a gift, I said. It is a return. I opened the box. Inside was the diamond bracelet, the one she had bought with stolen money 5 years ago, the one I had confiscated at the gala. I kept it, I said. I kept it in my safe. I told myself I would give it back to you the day you didn't need it anymore, the day you could buy 10 of them yourself but chose not to. She looked at the diamonds. They sparkled in the dim light. I don't want it, she whispered. It reminds me of who I used to be. Then sell it, I said. Sell it and give the money to your library project. Turn a symbol of greed into a symbol of giving. She took the box. She closed it. I will, she said. That is a good idea. We stood there watching the snow fall. The city was quiet. The war was over. I realized then that this was the true inheritance. Not the trust fund, not the real estate portfolio. This moment, this peace, this understanding that we had walked through the fire and come out the other side refined like gold. I checked my watch. It was late. I should go, I said. My driver is waiting. Chloe walked me to the door. She helped me with my coat. She hugged me tight. Happy Thanksgiving, Dad, she said. Happy Thanksgiving, Chloe. I walked out into the hall. I took the elevator down to the street. The cold air hit me, but I didn't mind. I felt warm inside. I got into the back of my car. Where to, Mr. Freeman? The driver asked. Home, I said. As the car pulled away, I looked up at the window of the loft. I saw Chloe standing there waving. I sat back and closed my eyes. I was 80 years old. My work was done. My legacy was secure. Money can buy a house, but only character can keep a home. And finally, after all these years, my daughter was home. Respect is not a currency you trade only with those who have power. It is a seed you plant in every interaction. My son-in-law judged me by my coat, not my character, and in doing so, he lost everything. Wealth is silent, but dignity roars. I didn't destroy his life. I simply removed the safety net he didn't know I was holding. True inheritance isn't the money you leave to your children, but the integrity you force them to build when they have nothing left. Never let arrogance blind you to the giants walking among you in silent shoes. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven them sooner? Or would you have let them fall even harder? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, and the truth is always stranger than fiction. Until next time, walk tall and keep your eyes open.